Hey, hello everyone. Welcome in this MVA modules about cross-platform development with Visual Studio. Hey,
hey Eric. How's it going?
Fine. And you?
Fine. Great.
Okay.
So thanks everyone actually for joining us, and let's get to it.
Yes.
I guess people want to know what we want to talk about.
Okay.
Actually, we want to talk about us first, right? How about you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm a long Microsoft series. I come from France, as you can hear with my accent. Right now, I'm working for Microsoft Open Technology as a technical evangelist, and I really enjoy that.
Awesome. And I'm Olivier Bloch, and I'm also a French guy. Yeah. And I work for Microsoft Open Technology as well, and we'll tell you a bit about what MS Open Tech is about and why actually we're interested in that cross-platform development story. And I've been actually in the Microsoft world for the last, 7-8 years, and before that I was developing embedded systems.
Yep.
So I love gadgets, I like to make software run on them.
I remember that.
Yes. Great.
Okay.
Before we get into the actual topic, we want to set the expectation. So what kind of audience should we expect here?
Today we are going to talk about web development. So of course, HTML5, JavaScript, CSS developer are more than welcome. But if you have some kind of allergy for the web, stay connected because we are going to change your mind about that technology today.
Exactly, and so we also want to drive the discussion to explain how we think web technologies are great for doing cross-platform development. This is not the only solution, and we'll see what kind of solutions exist today, but web technologies are a good solution, and as a matter of fact, MS Open Tech is very much involved in contributing to the Apache Cordova project that we'll talk about. So maybe in like 2 words, can you talk about Apache Cordova here?
Apache Cordova is just the fact that you can have a website, a web technology, some HTML pages, and you embed that in a native application running on devices like Windows Phone, but not only Windows Phone, that's the main subject today, that work on iOS, that work on Android, and since last week, that run on Firefox OS 2.
Nice. Awesome. So there's also a couple other things we're going to talk about, like WinJS and other things. So before, once again, we jump into that, one last slide about the MVA community, which is a huge repository of training for you guys online. Over 2 million of you have now registered, and you can actually earn what we call the MVA points, 50 of them, visiting that website, ak.ms/MVA-voucher, and enter this code specific to the session you're now watching right now.
And win 50 points.
And win the 50 points.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
What is the day about?
Oh, we have a lot of things today. We have a lot of speakers because we don't want to be alone presenting this stuff. We invite.
They'll be bored with French guys, like.
Yeah. And sometimes the French accent can be an issue for you. So we invite some engineers from Visual Studio team, from WinJS, to have something very animate.
Great. So today, the first module we're going to talk about, the both of us, is how you can bring your web skill and code to build apps for mobile platforms. We'll dig into one way of doing that with web app templates.
Yeah. What is web app templates?
What is what? Well, we'll talk about it. I have an answer for you.
Okay.
Then we'll look into what we call the multi-device hybrid app extension for Visual Studio.
Yeah, a very cool tool. Totally integrated in Visual Studio, but let's see with the guy who created the code for us.
Yeah. So as it's real life, not everything works well the first time.
Oh, really?
We call that le pays des bisounours in French, right? So that's not the case here. And so you will face some issues when bringing JavaScript, HTML5, CSS code into an app. And we'll talk about these issues, show some solutions to go through that. The last 2 modules of the day will be a deep dive into WinJS.
Yes, WinJS is very cool because it's very multi-platform, high performance, very nice themes, and you can use in Cordova, as we are going to see it today.
And last but not least, we're going to bring Mr. David Catu.
French guy.
Another French guy, sorry for that. But definitely, David is the expert when it comes to 3D and WebGL. And obviously, considering the actual hardware performance, it's really interesting to consider WebGL, which is now cross-platform, because all of the mobile browsers today support WebGL to build a 3D experience into your mobile app.
Definitely.
let's get to it.
Yeah,
That
let's
was a
go.
long introduction. Module 1, from web to apps.
But why cross-platform dev?
Why doing cross-platform dev is definitely the first topic we want to tackle. Obviously, why and then how.
Yeah.
Right? So what are the options and really what are the steps for bringing your web experience into an app? Apache Cordova being definitely the platform we want to talk more about today.
Yeah.
And show some examples. You have some great devices and tools and toys to show us, so we'll go to that.
Yep.
And have these nice apps demonstrated.
So, cross-platform development using web technologies.
Why and what does that mean? So we want to narrow the discussion because when we talk about cross-platform development, it can mean a lot of things. In our case, cross-platform, and that's for today's talks, is devices. We talk device platforms: iOS, Android, Windows Phone, Windows. We're talking these consumer platforms. We're not yet extending to the IoT or whatever else, even though,
Yeah.
you'll hear about that later on. And when we talk about web technologies, we're talking about
CSS, HTML5, and JavaScript,
yes,
of course.
And a word you're going to hear me say again and again is web standards.
Yes.
Right? Web standards, very important.
Yeah, very important today, but let's see that later.
Yes. So the first question is, you were asking, why would you want to go cross-platform? There's some very obvious reasons. I think the actual, area we're working on has moved a lot. Today, a mobile application is no longer about the application itself.
Yeah.
It's about serving services, about accessing data, information, and so on.
Yeah.
And in the context of cloud first, mobile first, I like to say cross-platform first, actually, because it's very important to be able to extend to reach more clients. Having more devices connected.
Yeah, for me it's pretty simple. I want to write once my code and run everywhere in Android, iOS, or Windows Phone.
Exactly. So that's definitely the bottom line. And but from a more business-oriented perspective, write once, deploy many is great, and run everywhere is great, and you need that. And the reason why you need that, another big reason beyond selling your services to more customers, is the bring your own device phenomenon. So especially in enterprises, right?
Yeah. It's phenomena we observed since a couple of years now, and become huge and huge. Even in Microsoft, you can see some guys coming with their own devices.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
And actually, as the guy deploying the application and the line of business application, you want to deliver a single experience. You want to go beyond, the OS itself and make sure that you can maintain that application and redeploy and fix and so on.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's
and
very important.
You want to switch from device to another one. For example, if you are in a factory, you have a small devices, robust devices, and you switch to a small tablet when you're back in your office and this kind of thing, and you want to continue with your application.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. The other thing is going through the stores to extend your reach. Like giving an app for side loading as a zip file doesn't work much anymore. Right? So you definitely go through the stores, and therefore would like to still find a way to not have to reinvent, for each of the platforms, right?
Yeah.
And that next reason is definitely a potential because you don't have time for, or you can't afford to learn a new language and new tools, new technologies.
Exactly.
So that's something that there are a lot of differences in the native technologies to build app for iOS, Android, Windows today. And you might not want to actually have 3 teams working for each of the platforms. You might not have the resources for that. And actually, longer term also, you might want to go in a place where you are developing once and deploying many, as you were saying.
Yeah.
This one is also related to what you're saying. You need to get to market fast and in many places at once. Right? Imagine you have the last startup was the greatest idea for a nice service. If you're not on all the mobile platforms, or at least on the major ones, rapidly, your idea might just not be something you can monetize at all. So you can definitely go there. And last but not least, why would you do cross-platform?
Because you can.
Because you can. Okay.
Easy.
So what are the common options to do that?
Yeah, there is several ones. The oldest one is, of course, C++. C++ is everywhere, on every device, on every kind of OS. Of course, C++ is very standard, and I think Olivier and you are really focused on the standard. C++ is really standard things, except for the interface, except for the graphic library. Of course, you have STL with C++, and you can write your code and it potentially run in console mode in every platform, depending on the compiler sometimes, but in every platform. But for the graphic interface, there is an issue at this time. Perhaps in the future we will see a new graphic interface, multi-platform, but at this time there is some initiative, very interesting initiative, and Microsoft OpenTech will follow some more for creative developers than for the enterprise business. But something like Open Framework, you can run on iOS, you can run on Android, you can run on Linux, Mac, and blah, blah, blah. So C++ is a good strategy. You have the power, you have close to the metal, you have the huge potential of high performance. You have a learning curve for C++, of course, it's not so easy as the web technologies. And again, this lack of graphic interfaces perhaps stop the C++. But in the future, I will not be surprised if C++ reborn with a new graphic interface, but let's do that.
Interesting. That's not a spoiler.
No.
The second language option, if you take it from the language perspective, would be C#.
Yep.
So obviously on Windows platform with .NET, C# is definitely a good choice.
Not only on Windows platform, because Xamarin Project provide a C# on other platforms.
Yep.
It's a very interesting project, and we work closely. Microsoft work closely with this guy now. It's very nice to see.
And back to the topic that obviously these are not the only options, right? Once again, we're not trying to narrow like the world. We're talking about the most common ones. And HTML5, the web technologies are definitely a good option. And we'll see why in a minute. And a solution to implement that is something like that we call a hybrid application, a mix of native and web platforms. We'll see how that is built up, right? And that's what we want to focus on.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what we want to talk about. Web technologies. So why would you go with web technologies for cross-platform?
First, HTML5 is finished.
Yeah.
It's not a spoiler too, but you will.
Yes, it is a spoiler because actually it's a live event here, and in about 45 minutes you get some more information about HTML5 being finished.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. Check out the various news feeds about HTML5.
But we can consider that HTML5 is finished, and the working group started the HTML 5.1 work right now.
Okay.
So we have a solid foundation to build the web of the future. We have a solid foundation to build the application right now with a really cross-platform thinking, really cross-platform technology, HTML5. Yeah.
Great. And today, when you look at the modern, mobile platforms, all of them have an HTML5 compatible browser. So HTML5 is finished, and that's great. At the same time, all these mobile platforms are actually tracking these standards and implementing browsers that support these standards. So that means we have a common ground across these platforms.
Exactly.
And in the same way, HTML5 is ready for apps from enterprise to gaming. Right? We're talking about line of business application. Yes. We'll talk about WebGL. So that's the full spectrum of what.
Yes. From the enterprise to the game, HTML5 is all-terrain
exactly.
technology.
Well, they can also consider the fact that you can very easily theme or put a skin on your app to go cross-platform. It can be interesting. We'll see scenarios where that is needed. Obviously, in the same area, having a responsive design, something that adapts to the various form factors. A tablet is not a phone. Now you have like these big, huge phablet phones that are actually our new target. So you need to be able to adapt.
It's very cool because you can you can spend a lot of time to adapt your application in different form factor with this kind of design is automatic.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Great. You also have the choice of giving an online or an offline or an experience that is mixed. And what I mean by that is that you can choose to expose a web page that is hosted on a server in the cloud or something, or you can choose to have a pure offline experience, meaning that if the device is not connected, you still have a web experience locally because you have local storage and things like that. So that's really one of the things that you have options here with web technologies.
And the offline scenario are really important to consider when you write your application, because again, in the scenario you are in the factory, perhaps you are in a room without connection, but the application needs to still alive and you can work on it.
Exactly. There's two things that actually are next in my list here. They're actually dear to MS Open Tech, Microsoft Open Technologies. So we didn't mention that, but
exactly.
we are actually part of the subsidiary, which role is to bridge the Microsoft and the non-Microsoft world. So the idea is to say, when there's a technology, mostly open source, it doesn't work on Microsoft platforms, whether it's the cloud or the devices, we like to go out, contribute code, make that work on Microsoft platforms. We also are looking into open standards, all right, because making non-Microsoft technologies running with Microsoft technologies implies that they talk to each other, meaning that working on open standards with the ecosystem, with the industry is very important to us. So here, we're talking about the fact that there is a lot of existing reusable JavaScript frameworks.
Yeah.
And we are contributing to them to make them work on our platforms. But also, you as a developer can just go and pick, because there's so many of them that are part of such a big, huge open source community that actually it's just like go shop and use them.
Yeah, it's just back to the MS Open Tech subject, because it's really interesting to see that you have today two French guys that leave from Paris to go to Seattle and bet on the open source at Microsoft. We really believe together at MS Open Tech that the future of Microsoft is around open source technology. That's why we invest a lot on this kind of technology like Cordova today.
Yeah, and we know that web is a place where there's a lot of open source developers and technologies and frameworks. And so we think that actually web technologies to build cross-platform apps is great because of that emulation around the projects and the fact that if something doesn't work, someone will go and fix it, if not yourself. So that's pretty great. Yes. The last point is about, so we have HTML5 everywhere, right? It's great. Some years ago, it was not that performant. It was something that was pretty sluggish and slow. It was just for web. Today, we have very powerful hardware.
Exact. We have very powerful graphic hardware, even in few devices like a phone. And that's why, for finishing the day, we invite David and talking about WebGL. Because WebGL in 3D, it's a real technology you can use today in your application. So think twice about performance issue, because that you will see today perhaps open a door about new kind of application for you.
Great, awesome. WebGL, gaming, graphics, actually is definitely the last big topic. I'm sure we'll left aside a lot of other reasons why HTML5 is great for cross-platform development. However, I think we can jump into another part here, which is talking about what it takes to bring. Now, let's assume you want to do. Well, we convinced you guys, so we want actually to help you drive from. You have an existing website, or you have a strategy to go from web to your app. At a very high level, this is how it's going to look like. You start with a website. I think it's the the low-hanging fruit. You have a business, you have a service you want to sell, you go through a website. That's the best way to reach a lot of platforms, PCs, Macs, phones, tablets. Everyone has a web browser.
Yeah.
One piece of advice here is think web standards. That's very important, right?
Agree with you.
So different platforms to target. Yeah. The only common denominator here is web standards.
Exactly.
That you can count on and that you're sure of. The next step is going mobile. Right?
Yeah.
So, what is specific to mobile versus web?
The size of the screen, the fact that sometimes you are in no connection area, so you need some kind of stuff for the offline scenario.
Okay, and so form factor, responsive design, mobile version. Once again, think web standards. These devices are running browsers that comply or not to web standards, so you definitely want to think about it.
Yep.
The next step, once you have a mobile version of the website, still pure online on the web, now you want to go with something which we call hybrid apps, right? You want to kind of mix and match the native and wrap, HTML code into a native app, still having the content being online. We call that web context, right? So that's something that actually is illustrated by the web app template for Visual Studio. That's one of the options.
The what template? The
what template. Okay. And with David, we'll talk about that in about half an hour. And then once you have that web experience wrapped into a native app, the next step, as you were saying, is going offline. Deliver an offline experience.
Exactly.
Right? Being able to have an app totally self-sustaining, standalone, no need for any connection, whatever. Obviously, you want to have data connection, but you don't need it, right?
Exactly.
And so another thing which is important is accessing the hardware resources.
Yeah. If I want to access to my camera, to my storage, diverse sensors, can I do it with a HTML page?
Not all of them, because web standards are not all, to that point right now. So I know there are some standards about defining how you access your hardware resources from a browser.
Exactly.
But we're not there yet. I mean, it's for HTML 5.1 or other versions, but you have a solution called Apache Cordova.
Exactly, with the plugin. But let's talk about that later.
Remember, web standards.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Very important. Remember, web standards is very important. I think you're going to hate me for saying web standards all the time. One last time, web standards, right? When you're going to bring that code, that web code, into an app for a mobile device or for a PC, you're going to face issues. Right? Nothing, as we're saying, is just as easy as you would expect it. So my first advice is web standards, right?
Yes.
See, if you've not thought web standards, if you thought about specifics like adding vendor prefixes into your web code, which can be very useful. Some browsers are more in advance, I would say, or are trying to innovate in a certain direction in advance to the others, and you might want to use these new features that these browsers offer. And in that case, you start using things that only work in a specific browser, which is a shame when you want to go cross-platform. So when you're developing your web experience, you definitely need to think web standards. Exactly. That's very important. That will actually avoid big issues.
Yeah.
And when we talk web standards, we talk HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, ECMAScript. W3C is actually a working group driving the HTML5 definition. So web standards. Okay, I'm done with web standards.
Yeah.
So what's the next one?
Not sure.
Maybe I'm going to bring that back.
Okay.
What about the next one?
About the next one, of course, when you run on the window, you have different security context. One is like a sandbox, and the other you have direct access to the platform. So we have to take caution about that, and we'll see in the JavaScript compatibility. The next speech, the
one after.
What about this security issue and we can deal with?
Yeah, definitely, because we're talking about apps, right? So basically running on a mobile device and potentially having access to your data, to your location. So there's some privacy issue here that you need to be careful about. As you were saying, the sandbox is not the same. It's no longer a website in a browser. Another important point is the integration into the OS experience. How do you bring, an app that actually is compelling, that will not be, not looking good, and let me be blunt, deliver an iOS experience onto a Windows Phone device, or deliver, a Windows Phone experience onto something else, might not actually comply to what the user is expecting. So you need to think about how you deliver a user experience. And at the same time, you need to think about accessing the hardware resources. That's what we're saying, right? So accessing camera, file system, motion sensors, and so on. Yeah. So hooking up into the OS could be tricky.
Exact. As you mentioned, the right user experience is pretty important because right now the people are well educated and have some use application with right ergonomy and this kind of stuff. So it's very important to focus on the design, on the ergonomy of the application, and of course all this kind of sensor can help you with the motion sensor, with the magneto sensor, this kind of thing. Yeah.
And to extend a little bit on the user experience integration into the OS, you sometimes have, for each of the OSs, something specific to it that you might want to use. On Windows Phone, might be the live tiles.
Yeah, or other technology where we cover in a few minutes.
Exactly. Let me not waste it. But you definitely want to consider specificities also for your app. Yes, you go cross-platform, but you want that integration into the OS to be fluid. So you definitely want to use some of these features from the OS. You'll see that something like Apache Cordova helps you using that. And we have other tools we're going to talk about that can help you do that. Yeah. And that's the perfect segue to Apache Cordova.
So what is Apache Cordova?
Good question.
So it's an open source project. You can see the link on the screen. This project supports all the major mobile platforms today, even Firefox OS, that I mentioned earlier. It's a really mature open source solution, and we just lived the PhoneGap Day last week in San Francisco.
So you just say PhoneGap. So some of you might remember Apache Cordova as PhoneGap. So people might be confused by what is what. So in a nutshell, Apache Cordova is the open source project that is owned by the Apache Software Foundation.
Exact.
And PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova by Adobe.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Just to clarify that.
But for today, we are going to talk about PhoneGap and Cordova, mainly Cordova, with the same meaning, in fact. Okay, so with this brilliant and vibrant community, very, very active, we have a concrete project to port all your HTML5 and JavaScript from your website in a native application. That's the main goal of Cordova technology.
And so Cordova has been released at version 4 a few days ago. It has evolved from being that little geeky toy thing to being something really serious. And we'll show that some very serious customers are actually now adopting Cordova to go across platform for line of business applications, but also for consumer application. And in terms of development tools, actually, you'll show some of the tools that allow developers to go cross-platform from command line to a full integration into Visual Studio.
Exact. And this kind of technology, come from the command line interface, that the core technology of Cordova. But we are going to see in the future some integration in IDE. And the first of the IDE is Visual Studio. And last week at PhoneGap Day, again, we have a good success about that because we are really deep inside the integration with Visual Studio and Cordova, enables some crazy scenario about iOS, Android, or Windows platform directly from Visual Studio, and you don't move from Visual Studio. That's very important. And of course, all the power of Visual Studio is for you. You can use profiling tool, you can use source code tool, you can use everything from Visual Studio for the Cordova project.
There's another piece of a very interesting thing about Cordova. It's related to web standards. I know.
Oh, no.
So the idea is that Cordova explores a way for web code to access hardware resources and so on. And they define an API for that. So from JavaScript code, you have a Cordova API to access, camera and other hardware resources. And that's the same API across the platform, because that's the way they define Cordova, and that's the way Cordova is designed. The philosophy of Cordova, when you talk to the main Cordova creator, is to actually go away. The idea is to be not only a solution for people to build cross-platform apps, but also to be a playground for web standards, where we can experiment APIs that can then be integrated into a spec for HTML5 JavaScript, and then be integrated into the browsers themselves, into the rendering engines that are in the app platforms. So this is a very interesting place to look into, and actually you will notice if you look at the Cordova ecosystem that all the major browser manufacturers or builders are actually in the community, contributing, working together. It's a very fascinating thing to look into, to work with, because you can fight with someone, and then when you are in the Cordova ecosystem, it's just like all together trying to make that work. That's pretty. It's pretty amazing.
That's the main reason why MS Open Technology is working on Cordova, because we really see the standard aspect, the cross-platform, and the fact that it's open source. It's very, very interesting project for us. That's why we invest a lot in it.
And it happens so that other groups at Microsoft are now interested in Visual Studio for that integration of Cordova to build apps for not only Windows, but also iOS and Android. And we'll have a really nice demos about that later on today. But also a team like Win.js, right? They're a cross-platform UI and data binding JavaScript framework, and they are very much interested in seeing how they can interact into a Cordova app. And we will have some demos about that also today. Yep. And last but not least, the Windows team is interested, right? They do see Cordova as a very viable solution to build cross-platform apps on Windows and other platforms as well. So that's a very interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, that's why we want to organize this NVA talk about Cordova, because it's something emerging at Microsoft and outside Microsoft, and you have to look at
There are also, when we talk about cross-platform development with web technology, a couple of other things we recommend you look at. WinJS is one of them. You can get information on buildwinjs.com. You'll have a full hour session, about 45-minute session today about that. It's an open source technology, and it actually is cross-platform. It used to be something designed for Windows, but now went outside of Windows and allow you to use it on other platforms.
And the performance are really incredible. Just have a look at it.
Yep. And the last one?
TypeScript. TypeScript, it's the last language created by Anders Edsberg. It's very, very smart. It's a way to have a strong typing around JavaScript. And the output, it's very important to understand that the output of TypeScript is JavaScript, human readable JavaScript. So you can use TypeScript to have a strong typing, to have all the tools you need, all the control when you write the code, and produce a very clean JavaScript, a very standard JavaScript. So it's very useful, and you can use TypeScript in any platform.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, great. Let's see some examples. We've been talking a lot.
Yes.
So I guess it's time to check out a couple of examples.
Yeah.
I'm gonna here start some of the Cordova applications that are on the Windows Phone Store. So let me start this guy here and project my screen. So you have here a Windows Phone device.
Yep.
And the first app I want to show real quick is Social. So I don't remember how we say that. It's a Microsoft app, very interesting app that looks into a way to do social media that is different. And here, what you see is just a Cordova application. You will have the exact same experience on iOS and Android for that application. It integrates media, it integrates a lot of features. That's a Cordova application that gets data from a cloud service. And you can see that you have animations, you have an experience that is very much native-like. It's something that if you didn't know it was a Cordova application, well, you would not guess it. It's like pretty integrated, pretty normal experience. The second one I have, it's dear to my heart. It's an app that we actually worked with some community out there in order to extend it. It was an iOS and Android only app, and we met the guys at a PhoneGap Day event, and talking to them, they were telling us, no, we're not targeting Windows Phone because it doesn't support Cordova. And we're just like, no, that's not true, actually. MS Open Tech is contributing, and look at that. And the guys didn't even look into Windows Phone as a solution. And it took them something like a couple of weeks to get the app published on the store with all the features that were available. So this one is about sharing your, it's a kind of a beer drinking social app. I've not been very good. You see, no distinct beers, badges, whatnot. I have 2 usernames, one for the demos, was nothing in there, and one was my real life. Anyways, so that's the second app. Once again, very much integrated into the overall experience of Windows Phone. You have a tile that is live and things like that. But the idea is to show that here, an app that was for iOS and Android, developed using Cordova, has been ported in a couple of weeks only onto Windows Phone. The last I want to show, before we switch to maybe more sexy demos of yours, is Browser Quest. It's for those of you who have some, nostalgia of very old pixelated games.
Oh, I love it.
This one is it's been developed. It basically was ported to the web from some console, and then from the web ported to PhoneGap app.
Okay.
And it was super easy to do. And I'm dying.
Yeah, be careful.
But you get the idea here of how easy it is to actually go from web to an application using Apache Cordova, and I think you have a couple more, I would say, advanced demos. These were pretty basic type of apps. So I guess you have some of the demos you've been building available.
Yeah, on my screen you can see my phone right now, and the first demo I want to show you today, it's this little game. In fact, it's a Coco Studio, as you can see. It's a Coco Studio game, and Coco Studio engine provide two engines. One is C++ and cross-platform engine C++, and one is HTML. And of course, when I thought that, I think, oh, can I build a Cordova application with that? Of course I can. So it's a teeny one, funny. Sometimes it's okay. I did. Okay. Yeah, with sound and everything in it. So it's pretty cool to see that Coco Studio can be used in a Cordova context, and it's important to see and to know that this night in China there is a very important conference about Coco Studios, announcing the V3 and the support for this kind of thing.
Awesome. So web technology using physics engine and so on, encapsulated into a Cordova application.
You just say physics.
Yes.
Let's look at the physics here. In fact, this application is built on Babylon.js, and we'll see Babylon.js later in a day. And that you are seeing right now, it's just WebGL on a Windows Phone 8.1. Because the last version of Cordova, 3.6 from Microsoft, Fusion merged with the 4.0 you mentioned, has a support for WebGL, so you can have some cool application and with the 3D and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of course.
That makes me think, actually, sorry to interrupt you, so
yeah.
I just saw on that app that you were touching and you had this kind of like virtual joystick appearing.
Yes.
There's one thing we didn't mention, which was in the way you interact with a mobile app today. In the web, it's mouse and keyboard, but on devices, it's touch that enters into the game.
It's touch and sensor. You will see a lot of game or a lot of application just moving the phone.
So,
and of course,
that's one of the other problems you need to look into, because today all the platforms do not treat touch and pointers the same way. So we have some interesting discussions, but that's for another MVA, I guess, about thinking how people will interact with your application and adding a layer in between to have a standard way to accept the touch and the pens and the mouse events into your web application in that case.
Exact. We just saw on a funny application, a graphical application, and of course, if we have a new kind of camera, and Babylon provide me a new kind of camera, you can have a scenario with this kind of stuff, the VR cardboard from Dodo Case. Nice. So let me start my application. In fact, it's exactly the same application except that I stopped the engine, physics engine, and I can look inside.
Nice.
Yes. Wow.
So people don't see it, but it's a 3D rendering through the cardboard thing, right?
Yeah.
Come back, Eric.
Yes. So I just want to share with you this kind of possibility. It's very cheap and very useful. You can have a very nice experience with that.
And you would deliver the same experience using an Android phone or an iOS device.
Exactly.
They are WebGL compliant,
exactly.
So you can deliver that same experience and have to fit in the cardboard VR thingy, right?
So the last application I want to share with you today, it's a bit tricky for a French guy. You will understand immediately why. Okay, I will start here. Cortana, you know Cortana, it's a digital assistant for Microsoft Windows Phone. And I will ask Cortana something about Phone Gap Day. Why? Because during the Phone Gap Day last week, we produced a new plugin for Cordova, a plugin Cortana. And with this plugin, developer can code application. Cortana can call the application, start the application, and go in the application in particular point to respond to your question.
So basically, you can have Cortana start an application with parameters that are the result of a search, right?
Yeah.
That it does. That's great.
Exactly.
So let's see it.
Okay, let's jump on the swimming pool.
No pressure.
No pressure. Phone Gap Day. Show me the Microsoft Oh, no.
Ah,
Phone gap day. What is the next session?
Showing next section.
Yes.
nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. So as you can see here, ask Cortana something about phone gaps, and Cortana start the application I created with Cordova. Show me the agenda of the day 24th October. It's past event, but the principle is here. Of course, you created a syntax, a dictionary of words, and you can ask Cortana for the next session. You can ask Cortana for the session from Brian Leroux. You can ask a lot of questions. You define in the dictionary in an XML form. You have to start. You have to start once the application to register that in your phone, and after that, it's okay. Cortana know the application and know how she can use the application.
Awesome. That's great. Eric, we have a few minutes left. How about we do a command line demo of Apache Cordova?
Yeah.
Like real quick.
Good point.
Like the Cortana demo worked, so I guess you're good now.
Yes. Yes.
So here, while you get that started, in a nutshell, the way developers like to do Cordova development today is using command line tools.
Exact.
I'm sure after today and after the Phone Gap Day presentation, they will love to use Visual Studio as well because it offers a lot of options.
Yes.
But the way they do development today is command line, and very important to MS Open Tech is to make sure that we deliver to developers the experience they need.
Exactly.
So what you're going to show right now is the way you can target Windows devices using command line tools for Cordova.
Exact. So the first thing is to call Cordova to create an application, for example, MVA test. So let's Cordova create that. Here we go. Change the directory to MVA something. Okay. And here we have something like some directory, like a wah directory containing the HTML file for your application. Here directory for the plugin you want to have, if you want to use, we said hardware or something like that. And here the platform. Of course, you can have multiple platforms. That's the main subject of today, like iOS, Android, or Windows. So let's add a new platform here. So Cordova. Platform. Oops. Remove my box slope. And I want to add, of course, platform Windows.
Yeah. So you would do the same thing for Android, right? As in,
I think it's platforms.
Add. Yeah. No. Cordova platform
Yes.
add.
Oops.
Windows. There you go.
Okay, it is.
So what it's adding right now is a Visual Studio solution, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the error was nice because you see here what the different platforms are present in my machine.
Okay,
Cordova,
awesome.
and which platform I can select. In this case, I just add a new platform for Windows, and now I can ask Cordova to build the application itself. Cordova build Windows.
Okay. So it's actually building the binary based on the Visual Studio solution. So it's basically scripted the thing. And it would be the same for Android, right?
Exact.
Great. And we'll see.
The same for each platform you see here.
Yeah. So there's one specific thing, though, which is the way it's going to be done for iOS from a Windows machine, and we'll see that later today. It's very interesting how you can use Visual Studio and the tools that are part of the multi-device hybrid extension for Visual Studio to not only target Android and Windows, which are supported locally with local SDKs, but also iOS, which happens to not be something you can develop on Windows. But we have a solution that's great. So you built the application for Windows. And now we can just run the app. Great.
I can just run on Windows device, or on Windows machine, or on Windows device. Let's try that.
And so the web developer would actually work in that dub folder that you demonstrated, you showed in the first in the first folder, and would just edit his HTML5, JavaScript, CSS code in his favorite code editor. Yeah, device is ready.
Et voilà.
Awesome.
The application is built, running well on Windows. Okay, this application is just a hello world, and we can do exactly the same on the phone, but I see the time is flying. And
That's good. Awesome. So I think we'll stay there, and we'll have more Cordova demos coming. We definitely invite you to stay around. The next session is about Windows app template, and we will talk about how you can bring that web experience to websites and make it available through the Windows Store, in that case, for phone and Windows PCs using the what.
Exactly.
Thanks very much.
See you later.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Oh, welcome, David.
Thank you.
And this module right now, in the context of developing cross-platform application with web technologies, will cover the web application template, commonly called what?
What? Absolutely.
Who are you, David?
Who I am? I'm David Ketu. I'm working for Microsoft, and I'm dedicated to everything related to open web standards and AI. I'm in a special team called DX for developer experience, and we are focusing mainly on discussion with web developers.
Great. I like your T-shirt.
Thank you. I have standards.
You have standards, definitely. The module today actually will cover a lot of things.
Yep.
So the first one is, what is what?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, right? We'll explain how you can download what and how you can install that. We'll look into the various configuration files, the package manifest for the application, the app config file for what. We'll mention Apache Cordova, as in, how does it integrate into the story here. We'll look at how you can style your what application. What are the native functionality of the OS you can access? Like camera and things like that, from what?
And my favorite feature.
And your favorite feature is the offline mode.
Absolutely.
Right? So being offline actually is something critical for an application, and we'll see how you can do that with what. And last but not least, we'll have a link to the various resources that will be useful for you as a developer to develop with what.
Yep. So what is what?
So what is what?
Yeah.
Good question. That's a framework that allows you to use a website as the foundation for your Windows Store app. So the idea here is that even though we can do JavaScript HTML5 development for Windows Store applications natively, right, without needing any sort of wrapper or web view control, it's very interesting to see how we can help businesses bring their existing website onto our platforms rapidly. Right? That could be step one of a new reach to our platforms.
Yeah, that's the philosophy. It's a step one, and if you want to go deeper into some specific feature of the platform, then you will be able to do that. Yep. And I have to mention that right now we have the support for Windows Phone Store and Windows 8 Store, but in the near future we will also introduce the support for iOS and Android. Interesting. That's really cross-platform.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Is it using Cordova?
Sometime it will be. We have to think about specific features. Right now we have a good support on Android without Cordova, and we are thinking about what we can do on iOS.
So the philosophy is bringing your website, adding some metadata around it, right? That's this config.json file we're going to talk about.
Absolutely.
And get an app on the store. How about I show you how that looks like? Let me show you on my screen here on my little device. I've got an application, the Home Depot one.
And I can see the tile.
You can see a tile first, yes.
It's an app.
It's an app. It's integrated. I got it from the store, right? And from here, I can see something that looks very much like an app. It has a menu. I'm able to scroll through the content. I have a bar here.
The app bar is integrated.
Right? And not to spoil what we're going to show, but here I have an example of the use of a native resource. In that case, it's the camera to scan a barcode. And you can see the studio.
Hey, guys.
They're hiding behind the screens down there. Yes. So these are the guys actually delivering the MVAs for you guys. So I'm not
what you just shown us is a scanner, by the way. You can scan an item dynamically. It will be integrated into the app itself.
Yeah,
so it's really an app.
Yeah, and actually, when you're going to scan it, it's going to do a search into your app, right? So that's even more interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's jump into it. Downloading and installing.
First step. What do you need?
First step. Where to go? You need Windows 8.1.
Okay.
Right. That's it. a requirement that actually is pretty fine today, I would say. Visual Studio 2013, because the templates will run on VS 2013. VS Express is good enough. So Express,
It's free.
It's free. It's the free version. You need to understand what JSON format is, right? But honestly, I don't know JSON a lot, and this
it's
is
pretty natural.
straightforward.
Yeah.
It's pretty human readable type of syntax, so that's pretty cool.
Sure thing.
Another thing important is having a responsive website, right? Well, it's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended.
Yeah, if you want to provide a good user experience, you have to have a good site that can be stretched into different ratio, meaning on the phone or on the tablet, that's different. So your site should be able to adapt to these different resolutions.
Think about what the market is. We're talking Windows Store,
Yep.
and Windows Store is about tablets, like all the way from small, tiny, 8 inches, all the way to gigantic screens like this guy here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So think about that in the way you develop your application. You can find what on the what.codeplex.com website. So that's where both the source and the actual VSIX file are for you to install the extension, the extension for Visual Studio. You can also use Git to clone the code. I think it's interesting if you find things in the code that you would like to change.
Or you want to contribute
back.
If you want to contribute, feel free. It's really an open source project. It's open to everyone.
Awesome. And it's just about double clicking on the VSIX file, right?
Yeah.
Let's not do that now. Not mess up with the demo machine, right? And then once you have the VSIX installed, it's start Visual Studio, file, new project.
I can show you that, guys.
And you can show us that.
So switching to my computer, here I have Visual Studio, so 2013. I will go to new project, as you can see here. And if I select JavaScript, because it's about JavaScript here, I have a new template, web application template for universal app. Pretty straightforward. I just have to create this project, and in a couple of seconds, I will be able to create directly an application for a specific website.
So do you have to download the website?
I don't have to download the website. That's pretty interesting with this kind of stuff. No, I don't want to give you my connection. Sorry about it. So by default, we integrated this specific page when you open the project itself. So you have some pointer to the documentation and things about the future support of W3C Web Application Manifest. We will talk about that later. Yeah. But by the way, here, I just have a simple project. Here we have some extension that we will talk about after. There are more about supporting specific features like offline or integration with the platform. We will talk about that later. But basically here what we have an application for Windows 8.1. It's a universal application. So I also have Windows Phone, and we have a share environment. That's pretty much it. If I want to just specify that I want to start with this specific project,
which is the Windows Store version.
Yes, it will be the Windows Store version. Here, I have all the configuration shared between both applications, Windows Phone and Windows 8. So I just have to launch my project here. It will download for you specific feature required, like, for instance, here, JSON. The application will be compiled. And look, it's a pure application. I have here my top app bar. It's an application with interesting features, and what you are seeing here is the home page of web application template itself. Oh, I can change that. I just have, and you mentioned that before, to change this specific JSON file. It's a file where you can, and I will zoom for you guys, where you can specify, okay, please embed this specific URL. Here, obviously, I use what? What about creating an application for Bing?
Yeah, let's do that.
That's it. You just have to change that. And basically, my new application will be Bing.
Too easy.
Yeah, that's too easy, yeah, I agree with you. And it's an app. As you can see, I can manipulate the application like any other one. Obviously, I can put it here, play with this. Yeah, snapping, everything is supported. I can also show the charm bar here. We already have some specific settings that we can augment and add new features in it. Everything will be done just by declaring what you want into this specific config JSON file.
Awesome. Before you jump into the package manifest explanation,
Yep.
I have one question. So is Visual Studio allowing you to do some level of debugging, DOM inspection, and so on from here?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. You can see this specific application as a regular application. That's a true application.
Even though the content is a website?
Yes, because
Nice.
we are based on a technology called the WebView. The WebView with Visual Studio 2013 can be debugged, and I can drill down the WebView itself to open the website itself, gathering some information about the DOM or the JavaScript or whatever, defining some breakpoints into the code itself. It's like a regular application.
Got it.
But you control the content
Awesome.
on the website.
Awesome. So if your site is not working like expected on the app, then you're good to go with Visual Studio to debug it.
Yes, and we also have some great options that we will see quickly.
Yep. Okay.
So,
Good.
basically, everything is based on this manifest, on this JSON file. Sorry. First of all, if you want to define the application, some regular features are not into the config.json file itself. They are more related to the application. And when you are dealing with Windows 8 and Windows Phone, there are what we call the manifest. I can show you that quickly. Here, for instance, on Windows 8, I have the package manifest.
Okay.
It's some kind of, it's an XML file that with a visual editor here, where you can define the name of your application, the name that will be displayed on the store itself. Okay. The only thing that you have to keep is the start page itself. Please don't change the start page here, because everything is based on that. The application should launch this specific wrapper where the magic is done.
Okay.
Okay? So going back to the slide, don't change the start page. Everything else can be defined. So you can obviously play with the name of the application. Okay? You can also play with different assets, like you want to control the tiles, the colors, the background, the logo. Everything can be configured, guys. You can create your own application. The content of the application will be gathered for you from the web, obviously, but everything else, all the design and the visual information, can be changed. Okay? You can also change the splash screen, as I can see here, and you can also add specific capabilities. At least, obviously, your application will download data from the web, so you need internet as a capabilities.
Okay.
But if you want to play, for instance, with visual location, then you just have to check, okay, I will also play with visual location. Click the location checkbox. Same story with the microphone, the camera, whatever. Okay? You can also define the packaging. So the packaging is the information that will be sent to the store itself. Here I want to give this specific name, this specific version. And I can also say who is the publisher. We can see here that Jeff Berthoff is the name of the publisher, because Jeff is the lead developer for what? For web application template. That's why his name is here. The config file itself, I just shown you, is just in the config/config.json folder. Okay. Extremely simple. It's a purely, let me go back here. It's purely JSON, so a key and a value.
Okay.
That's it, nothing more. We added something really interesting, which is a schema. What's a schema? If I try to, let me open it again.
Is your keyboard working?
Sounds like the keyboard was not working. My keyboard is disconnected. That's interesting. It's funny stuff.
Did it run out of battery?
Perhaps. I may ask my friend from the studio. By the way, what I want to show you is that here, as you can see, my schema is defined. So if I want to type here an experiment for you guys, I will use the virtual keyboard.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, good.
The show must go on. So if I...
that's worse than that.
For instance, as you can see, if I just type something, the schema will help me with some kind of IntelliSense. For instance, you want to add geolocation? Not a problem. Just double click on that. Geolocation. Okay, someone is changing my keyboard. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, my keyboard is working. Is not really working well. I don't have all the features of my keyboard. That's really interesting. Okay, let me continue. As you can see, I just type the comma, and automatically he said to me, okay, yeah, you perhaps want enabled, because enabled is a feature supported by the geolocation. Yes, I want enabled, and I want to set it to true. to true.
Okay.
That's it. With just this specific line of code, I enabled into my application the support of geolocation. So if my website wants geolocation,
Okay.
it will work like this, nothing more.
Awesome.
Okay, going back to my
So
slide.
that's thanks to the schema to get the intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
the,
good.
the goal of the schema, the very first line we have here in the slide is just giving you some help while typing.
Got it.
You will be helped by Visual Studio. Okay.
Makes sense.
So by default,
Okay.
the minimal config file is this one. Just a schema for you guys to have some help. The name of your application, obviously, and where the data are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it. Obviously, you can add more interesting options. Everything else is optional.
Okay.
Okay, that's pretty interesting because you can just play with that, but obviously you will certainly want to configure more your application. So our section is working. You always have what underscore the section name, okay? And then you can have subsection, you can have options available directly into this JSON format.
Awesome.
You don't have to code. It's a declarative way of creating an application, and I appreciate that a lot.
You just made like half of the web developers run away here.
Yeah,
Saying
no.
you don't have to code.
Say,
Yes,
guys,
yes, say,
you
guys.
can obviously code. It's a different.
Actually, we
topic.
give you the option to not have to focus
Yeah.
into the wrapper. It's easy to configure, make the web experience, and the wrapper will take care of the rest.
But yeah, as you mentioned, you have to code your website. That's the point.
Yes.
Obviously, there is documentation for the config file. Everything is available online just there. Feel free to read it and use it. And Olivier, we perhaps should talk about navigation.
Definitely. Navigation through the pages, because obviously
Yes.
an application is about showing various type of data and in various ways and so on. So there are many ways that you can actually implement a navigation and how you can configure that. Well, first off, you can definitely just add links into your web app. So it's a web view control. So
It's
basically,
about web.
It's about web. So you click on the link, it's going to go to that page. Even if it's an external link, right?
Yep.
So that means you're in your own app showing whatever, Home Depot, and you want to go into Bing, boom, Bing search is going to bring up the Bing webpage,
It's interesting.
right? So why not? The thing is, then you can also think about adding things that are more native looking, right? More that integrate into the overall experience. You would expect, for example, to have a way to go back and forth from pages hitting the back button
Yes.
on the screen, right? So you have an overlay.
Or something in the app bar.
Or something in the app bar or nav bar,
Yep.
nav bar on top, app bar on the bottom, and then you have that idea of a nested navigation,
Yes.
which is also very interesting. Let's not dive into that right now, but the idea is really that you can take care of the navigation yourself. You can also configure what we call the automatic page redirects, like web content, right? So that's web. As a web developer, you know exactly what that means. We touch a little on that, the styling of the application, right? So navigating through the pages is important. Now the look and feel of the page is important also.
Yes, and you may want perhaps to change something on your website for your specific app. You don't want to have exactly the same look and feel, depending on where
definitely.
you are.
Definitely. And the basics for that is things like viewport. You
Yep.
have to define that there's a viewport, right? Your device has a fixed size. So you know already what you want. There's also something interesting, which is suppressing the default touch action.
Yeah.
What happens on a website when you pinch and zoom is fine, but if
Yes.
it's an app,
Perhaps you don't want that.
You want
Or
it the
even
same
when you are on the website and you want to navigate left or right by just sliding from left to right, perhaps you don't want that on an application.
exactly. So you have control over that using this config here called suppress touch action, and you put it to true. Notice like the syntax of that file is very JavaScript-ish, right? Lowercase at the beginning. Or,
Yeah,
you know,
we try to do that.
I like web developers. That's something that's for you. In terms of styling, then you have two different things you need to think about. The first one is the wrapper itself, right? The Chrome that we add on top of the web page itself around the web view control. Then you need to eventually consider styling the native elements themselves. We'll talk about that a little. And then there's the web application itself, and that's via the usual CSS injected styles, right?
That's funny because your website will send you some CSS, but you can override them. That's the funny stuff here. I love doing that. So,
Yeah.
for instance, you can change the look and feel of Bing if you want to have your own Bing with your own colors on your own style.
My own pictures in the background.
Yes,
exactly.
definitely.
With my kids, right? Or something, or your cats.
Or my cat,
Or your
the
cats.
pony of my wife.
Of your point of view. Okay, let's stop here. Actually, you lost me with the pony of your wife. Sorry for that.
You can inject CSS or you can control the Chrome.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And actually, I'm curious. What about to ask? I'm curious to see how it's going to look like when you talked about the iOS and Android support, because obviously your What application, if you want to go for iOS and Android versus Windows Phone and Windows, you might want to give a different look and feel.
Absolutely, that's the main goal of these specific features, controlling the look and feel depending on where you are, on what you are running on.
Great. Another thing you want to do, once you style it, looks good and so on, is add functionality.
Sure.
On that Home Depot app, you've seen how I could actually bring up the camera, capture. I didn't capture any because I don't have any Home Depot barcode around here, but next time I need to think about it. So basically, you can invoke the native resources, and basically it's something that is very useful for your app in terms of the experience, the integration. The first native feature you might want to use on your Windows Store app, whether for phone or for Windows, is the tiles.
Obviously, this is an entry point of your application.
Exactly, and that's not only the entry point, but that's also the way Windows mobile devices work, right? And the idea is to be able to add information for the user at first glance. And in a nutshell, what we're talking about here is adding a feed, that the tiles can use to display the information.
Absolutely. The first point is what I mentioned into the manifest itself, where you can define your own pictures.
Yes.
And obviously, as you mentioned, you can also have live tiles, where the tile will be updated automatically by Windows itself or by the phone itself, just by reading some RSS data. That's pretty cool.
And so you have a primary entry to the application, which is what we call the main tile, and then you have a secondary one, which is actually another page. Let's imagine the main page of my Home Depot app, and eventually a specific section of it, Halloween. And I can bring a pin to the home page of the device to go specifically on that sub-page on the device. For the primary tile, actually you will use the package AppX manifest file in order to configure that, looking into the Visual Elements tab, right? When it comes to the secondary pin,
it's just a declaration.
It's just a declaration in the JSON file, as always. So pretty straightforward. You enable that secondary pin. You put a text in there for the button that will be in your application to add the pin, and then you put the images that you want to show there, right? If you want the tile to be live, you add the live feed like that with tile poll feed function, declarative again, and that's the way you make that tile alive.
Let's imagine, for instance, for Home Depot, they have a website where there are some news using RSS. Then the live tile of your application will display this news. That's pretty amazing because you don't have to code anything, just declaring, I want the news on my tile. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Actually, question for you, David. When it's going to come to iOS and Android, with specificities that are proper to Windows,
yes,
will you have to delete that part of the code, or it will just be ignored?
They will be ignored, and obviously for some specificities, or for Android and iOS as well, we will add some specific section where you can declare that will be ignored by Windows.
Okay.
We try to keep things simple.
Easy. The next one is sharing.
Yeah.
If you've been using any mobile device, right, you're actually in an app. Very often, it's an app that displays information, news, and things like that, and you might want to share them. And in Windows, you bring up the charm, and you have a shared button, and all of the social media applications and reading lists and so on integrate into that experience.
Yes.
If you want to take advantage of that integrated experience from your What app, you actually can just invoke the shared charm from the application. It's pretty much like straightforward.
You want to enable it, and you say, I want to share a screenshot, a text, on URL. That's it.
Awesome. So the way you would actually do that is described, as you were saying, in the config file. And the thing here that we're talking about, sorry, I'm switching context here. We're talking about screen search now. So share, you bring it up, it shares, you define that in your config file. Screen search is another very important thing. You can actually have a search functionality into your What app, whether it's about searching in the app itself, through your website, for a specific word, or whether it's extending the search to more. But in that particular case, we're looking into searching within the website. And what I can see here in that search URL parameter in my config file is a link to myapp.com, which is basically the URL of your site, and search !, something.
Yes.
So basically, that means the site has a search functionality in there, right?
Absolutely. So, and it will be integrated. So you will have, for instance, a small button into your hub bar. You click on it, a text box will appear. You enter your search, and we will send that for you to this specific URL, myapp.com/search.
Okay.
And the result will be gathered for you and displayed into the app. So the experience for the user will be like, hey, it's a regular application.
Awesome. Like Home Depot example, I want to search through the
Same
store.
story,
Yeah,
absolutely.
awesome. Great. Easy. Geolocation, you mentioned that.
Absolutely.
So you can actually take it over from here because you mentioned the geolocation one earlier, right?
That's pretty straight for us. You just have to say, I want geolocation. And if your website is using HTML5 geolocation API, it will be supported freely for you. It's seamlessly, you don't have to do anything, just ask for what to enable for you the geolocation. And the geolocation of the device will be made available for you to the application itself.
Nice. So that means as a user, in terms of privacy, do I get to allow the app to get the geolocation information?
As always. You have to allow your user, you will have some kind of pop-up. Hey, this application wants to use your geolocation. Do you agree? And you have to say yes or no.
So it's not because you're in a web view context using a website that actually
we are
gets
still in
more
the same security context.
Love it. Great.
I can continue from here if you
Offline
wish.
mode. So we have an app coming from the web, but we want an offline experience, right? Because the device might not be always connected.
That's the story. When you are on a web browser, obviously you are connected. That's the basics of a web browser. But when you are using an application, sometimes your application, you will launch it when you are in a subway or in some space where there is no network at all. And when you want to launch your application, you want some feedbacks at least. You want to have some, hey guys, this application will not work because you are not connected. You don't want just a 404, which will be the experience you may have on the web page. That's why we decided to support what we call the super cache.
Super cache.
I love this name of this feature. I work a lot on this specific feature. So what we want to do for you is to try to save locally information that you already seen. For instance, if you open your application Home Depot, we will save for you, if the super cache is on, obviously, all the content already gathered. And then if you want to use the application when you are offline, because we already seen the main page, for instance, this page will be saved locally into a cache, into an IndexedDB cache, and then we will be able to serve that even when offline. If the user wants to navigate to a page that the application have never seen, in this specific case, we will display for you a wonderful page saying that something like, I'm sorry, this page is not available, you have to be connected to show this page. The funny stuff is that even if you are doing some search, if you already did that search, it will work.
Awesome. Great.
So, how we detect offline status, that's interesting because this is something almost supporting by the website. There are global events that the web browser send us. So the web browser can tell us, hey, we are online, we are offline, so we can work with that. The problem is that it's not working well all the time, so it's important for us to have a great infrastructure. It's what we did with the offline support. So sometime, even if we cannot download stuff for some reason, you are not exactly offline, but we cannot download stuff, the offline support will still work. That's important for us. So the user can only want online. That's an option you may have. The user can also have just a local solution for a specific offline scenario. So for instance, you have your own site, but you can also give us some specific page you want to display when we are offline. And obviously we have the gold version, the VIP version, with the super cache where everything is saved locally for you freely and seamlessly.
Great.
Sounds good. And obviously, I forgot to mention that, but it's just a declaration. You just have to say offline, enable, true. That's it.
I think you mentioned that several times.
Perhaps.
A declarative way of configuring your application for it to be available in the stores.
Yep.
You start from the website. We mentioned that in the previous module. You start from a website. You think mobile website, like responsiveness and so on. And now you're at that stage where you actually bring that web experience into the native experience,
including some native options.
Yeah, and we can see that, including native options, and we can see that we start having an overlap with the offline experience that Apache Cordova is really good at delivering. I do see as a really good complement of Apache Cordova, maybe a step before, or if you're happy with where you're at with your web experience,
You don't need more.
And super cache and so on.
Yep.
You're good to go. Another thing we didn't mention, which is very important, actually to the overall experience of an app, the updates. Being a website, you can update it as many times and when you want. The content will be updated live for the user. So that's a very interesting
Yeah, that's why I love
feature.
this version.
Great. The other couple of features we didn't mention, but integrating a business model, as in doing advertising and
For
so
instance.
on, or in-app purchase, a thing that you might want to think about, and what could be a good tool to do that?
Sure, because you like an application, so you have access to almost everything. We have a plugin system into Watt itself, where you can write some JavaScript-specific code if you want.
Yep.
That can be embedded for you into the application itself. So, for instance, you are talking about advertising. It could be in-app purchase or whatever. You want that just for your app, not for the website. In this case, the JavaScript required to do that will be developed into the Watt application itself and made this available only for the application and not for the website.
Great.
Pretty
So
cool.
we have 3 slides with resources that
Yes.
we want to show to the developer. Can you go through them?
Sure. You want me to go for the very first one? It's pretty
Yeah.
straightforward. This is the website of Watt, where we have some information. You can download, obviously, the latest version. For now, it's for Windows. We are working hard to get the Android version and then the iOS version. Documentation here is available on a specific site, where you can find almost everything about the config.json file if you want.
Actually, it's in Visual Studio too, right? When you start
Yes,
your
this
app.
is the same
Okay.
page. We
Nice.
are pointing you to this specific page. Or to install or to create. We try to create a lot of, I can say that, tutorial for you guys, so it should be easy to get started. And then
Great.
if you want to go further, we have obviously a support over a forum. You can open case in the Codeplex site if you want, if you have issues, discussion with people. Everything here is supported for you.
As any open source project. That's
Yes.
Great.
And the schema itself, just an interesting point.
Yeah.
This one is the current living document about W3C working on some kind of config.json file for everyone. So
I like the date of that document
yes.
because it's like a few days ago.
Yeah, like
It's-
3 days ago or
Yeah,
2 days ago even.
That's really a living document, and that's great to see how the idea of what is to go, with the standards. The idea
Yes.
is to deliver something that is standards compliant, but at the same time to propose an approach to W3C to make these standards evolve.
And if you're interested in that, you can start working right now with Watt, and we will be able, once the standard about manifest for web application will be ready, to migrate you from Watt to this specific standard.
Awesome.
We are discussing with all vendor browsers to try to define something that works well on all platforms.
Awesome. Okay. And we have a last few set of links that we can show rapidly for the attendees to be able to get to them, but you can also find them on the decks. The idea is to find some related reference. WinJS, we're going to talk about it.
Tiles, obviously.
Tiles, obviously.
In the offline mode.
Offline mode.
I wrote a complete blog here. I can show you if you're interested in how the offline system is working. We explain you all the stuff we are doing for you under the hood.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David. I think it was a great overview of what it is about, the web app template. And we'll follow up with more modules and sessions about cross-platform development using web technologies. And we'll see you later because you're coming back.
About 3D this time.
Thank
See
you.
ya, guys.
Hey, welcome back in the MVA cross-platform development with Visual Studio. For this new chapter, we are going to talk about the integration of Cordova in Visual Studio with Kirupa. So, you know myself, I continue to still here. And I'm really enjoyed to introduce Kirupa from the Visual Studio team. We thought it's better to add the creator of the code and the PM of the team for this talk. So Kirupa, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm happy to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Kirupa, and I'm a program manager in Visual Studio. And my job is to really make all of your HTML development dreams come true, whether it's writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. My team builds the templates, the code editing features you use, and a whole lot of other things, including support for Windows Store, Windows Phone, as well as what I'm going to be talking about today, Apache Cordova.
Yeah, apparently you don't sleep a lot. But
No, I'm always sleeping.
okay, module topics. We are going to talk about why with Visual Studio support you build a Hello World application, I think.
Yeah, there'll be several demos, Hello World, and then we jump between slides and some more demos just to give you a casual overview of what exactly happens as you're building your applications. A little bit of code, a little bit of overview, and then a lot of just fun along the way as well.
And a bit of debugging, of course.
Yes.
What happened behind the scene. Oh, testing an iOS app on your Mac, I think.
Correct. I'm running a parallel setup, and I will give you a quick demo of how to use Visual Studio to
Okay.
test your app on iOS.
Okay, and we cover the subject about plugging in the first chapter. So in Visual Studio, how we add plugin in the project and few additional resources.
Correct.
So let's go. Multi-device hybrid app extension.
Yeah, so many of you probably are very familiar with Visual Studio. You probably used it for many of your projects in the past. And it's a very familiar place for many of us to go and build applications, whether it is writing code, creating new projects, or even testing and debugging your app across a variety of platforms. We exist on all platforms from the web to things that happen on a native device to even applications running on the browser. So we're going to be taking that one step further with this talk, with the support for Apache Cordova, where you're basically using web technologies to basically package your applications to run on devices running on Android, iOS,
Yeah.
and Windows Phone.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, what did it take to build a Cordova app?
Basically, you saw earlier from Eric's talk, you can use the command line, you can acquire dependencies, you can do all this stuff manually.
Yeah.
But if you're someone like me who is more interested in this writing markup, writing JavaScript, and less interested in the whole, how do I get things set up to make things work, you have to take care of all the dependencies to install. You need to install Node.js for acquiring packages. You need to install Google Chrome for some of the browser-based testing, some of the command line tools, and a whole host of things that I kind of list in the left column. And, Eric, installation is only one part of it, right? Where you install your components, great, but now you need to configure it to actually make, work with your build environment.
Yeah.
So your
Yeah.
command line targets, your environment variables, and all
Oh,
these
yeah.
things are just, they're not complicated, but they're many small steps that add up to a lot of time. And when things don't work out properly, you're stuck trying to debug and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So to help with that, we basically have Visual Studio. So basically, imagine that you don't have to do all of this. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So, we lovingly call our little extension the multi-device hybrid apps for Visual Studio. And like I mentioned, we're looking for longer names, so please let us know towards the end. And so let's go to the next slide, Eric.
Yes.
Basically, imagine all those two counts of stuff that I showed you. Ignore all of that. Basically, go to the website. You can Google or Bing for the name and you will find it. Download it, it's one simple install. And then after that, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that we do take care of all this stuff for you. You can acquire all the third-party dependencies. We configure things to allow you to build for Android, iOS, and for all the Windows platforms. And beyond that, you get all the familiar functionality you've always had with Visual Studio, which is being able to run your app, debug your app. And I'm going to give you some demos that cover some of these things in a little more detail. And of course, also, because we are targeting devices, I will briefly talk about how to add native device capabilities. That's where the plugin story will come in.
Yeah. I confirm the setup story. It's very smooth process. I tried it several times, and it's much easier than the command line things. Even the Cordova, it's well connected with the node, and you can use npm to install Cordova and this kind of stuff. But definitely a setup in the Visual Studio, it's very
Definitely the value we add is that as you're building, as you're installing all the components, for building a simple Hello World app, you don't need everything you need. But as part of testing your application or you want to deploy it, that's where you want to ratchet up all the components you want to install. And we just take care of it all up front, so that way you're not worrying about, I need to basically install this extra additional component to be able to solve this particular part of my workflow. We just simplify these things for you pretty easily.
Sounds very good. So, a first demo?
Let's start with the first demo. I'm actually going to start from the very beginning. So you should see my desktop right now, nothing going on. I'm going to launch Visual Studio. Our extension works on Visual Studio 2013, running on Update 3, and it is currently a CTP version 2.0. So I just launched Visual Studio, and right now you see the classic Visual Studio start screen where you have some information going on here and some of the projects that I've created on the left. So what I'm going to do though is going to create a new project. When I click on New Project, you get what's known as a New Project dialog. This is the area where you can basically see all the various projects and languages that Visual Studio supports for you to build applications on. I have Visual Basic, C#, C++, all of that. But because the apps we're building are going to be JavaScript-based, I have the JavaScript node expanded already, and I have multi-device hybrid app as a category selected. And so we give you one template out of the box. It is a blank project that, as you'll see shortly, gives you everything you need to start with an application that has all the components you need for a Cordova app. So I'm going to just go ahead and rename this as, let's just call this my demo app. And add the number 2 as well for good measure. And I'm going to hit OK. And Visual Studio will take a few seconds to create the project. And let me go and close the start page that comes up. So first of all, when you see what's created is a slight variation of what you saw with Eric's command line demo where he added a platform for building a Windows app. What we've done is you have the exact same format. You have the folders, CSS, images, you have the scripts folder, and then some basic content. And we also give you 2 more folders that many Apache Cordova projects have, which is the merges and resources folder. The resources folder, shortcutted as res, is where you put all of your specific device assets, like your splash screen, your icons, and all of that. And then if you have any certificates for building or signing, you would put that here as well. And the next folder is also your merges folder. The thing to note is that Apache Cordova, unlike other solutions you might have for building multi-device applications, is really a build once and deploy everywhere kind of a solution. You have one code base that you end up deploying to multiple devices, but there will be times where you want to have slightly different UI or different content that gets served as part of building your application. And that's where the merges folder really comes in. If I want to have some special files that override, like let's say index.html, I would just put index.html right here in the middle of the Android location and be able to have a custom experience for Android.
It's in fact the same pattern that universal app. You have a main directory with all the source code you use for 90% of the application. Correct. And the specific to the platform in different folders, like here for Windows Phone or Windows folders.
Correct, exactly. I mean, the general model of having to, people generally don't want to write code multiple times, especially if it is entirely common. So both universal apps from our side as well as the Apache Cordova apps, there's a lot of convergence going on in how to make these just more, more productive as you're building these applications without duplicating things unnecessarily.
That's the aim.
Not duplicating code is always a good thing, right?
Yeah,
cool.
Definitely.
So that's a basic overview of project structure. And if I just open up index.html, it really is just basic HTML that you normally see in a web application. David talked a little bit about some of the web app work that they're doing, and it's just basically HTML. And as you'll see shortly, there's some slight twists and turns that make this HTML work on a device. But for now, though, let's just look at it in terms of I have an HTML document, I have standard HTML tags, I have some script references, and that's pretty much it. It's just basically, if you're familiar with web technologies, you'll be very familiar with building apps in Apache Cordova.
Yeah, it's exactly the same structure that Cordova, a project Cordova, classical project Cordova, sorry.
Yep. So now, before we go any further, let's see what this application looks like. So you're going to spend a lot of time writing code and writing your CSS and HTML and making sure things work fine. The way you make sure things work fine is by testing your application. And so to help with that, you have the debug toolbar, which is the set of icons I'm currently hovering over on the top. This is the place where you get to choose the platform you're interested in testing for. And then once you've chosen the platform, be able to select the actual debug target, whether it is a browser, whether it's an actual device or an emulator. So by default, we have Android selected. You can choose between Android, iOS, and multiple flavors of Windows configurations that you might be interested in.
We see exactly at this point the cross-platform effect of the MDD, because it's the first time you can see Android, iOS, Windows Phone in the same combo list in Visual Studio. It's very important.
Absolutely. We need to have epic background music right now to just to highlight how awesome this is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So I have Android selected, and if I select a drop-down on what I want to preview, you can see some of the Android deploy targets appearing. We have device, we have Android emulator, and your emulator can be either the stock Google SDK one, or you can also have Genymotion or any third-party emulator you want. We work beautifully with all of them. And then I'm going to spend some time with what's known as Ripple. And are you familiar with Ripple, Eric?
Yeah. I'm so familiar with Ripple because I really love the error message when my application don't start, and the Ripple message at this time, it's really, really funny.
Yes, yes, and so, and I'll show you in a second what it looks like. It's basically a way of testing your application in the browser itself. So let me go ahead and select, let's just select Nexus Galaxy, and I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And what's happening under the covers is the equivalent of what would happen if you used the command line tools earlier. All we're doing in VS is just providing some UI layer on top of it. So I hit F5 or hit the play button, and now you see Chrome has launched, and inside the Chrome browser, I see a version of my app surrounded by a device Chrome. And this is actually very convenient because, especially for Android and iOS devices, the rendering engine used is actually based on WebKit, and Chrome is heavily based on WebKit as well. So what you're seeing is a pretty good approximation of what you will see if you were to test on a device. Obviously, there are many quirks, basically because you are in a browser trying to emulate device capabilities. But for early stage development, especially for testing out what I have right now, it's actually very, very functional. And Ripple is not just a preview surface where you can just see what your application looks like right now. You actually have the ability to do some device-specific configurations. Like right now, it's in portrait mode. I can switch to orientation, and if I had any media queries, for example, that needed to activate when the app is in landscape mode, it'll go active right now, and you can actually see all of that coming alive. And you can make other changes as well that require, like, let's say I have an accelerometer, a code that deals with having to move
play
things
with
around.
the sensors.
Yep, I have a demo that comes on later where I'll actually show off some of the functionality right here. But then device and network settings, geolocation, you have a lot of ways of basically being able to simulate how your application will work on a device without actually having to deal with oftentimes the performance issues of using an emulator or some of the inconveniences of actually having to tether a device and having it work. So it's actually pretty sweet in that format. So let's just make sure that everything works, and it by default the blank template says hello, your application is ready. Let's just make it hello world, just to stick be consistent with tradition. Let me hit play again. Very quickly we can see that hello world now appears once the page is loaded, and it all just works fine. So this is the happy path. This is the path where I'm giving a simple demo, things work fine, and everything is great. But a lot of times, though, one of the big things that really we're providing with Visual Studio is that it's always had great debugging features. Yes. And it would be great if we could actually integrate the debugging features as part of building your Apache Cordova applications. And so let me quickly segue into that part of the demo where I just say, I'm going to add some more functionality to it, and it will be deliberately broken at first. So Eric, I'll ask you some questions to help me figure out what is broken. So that should be exciting. And then we'll actually use some of the debugging features to help us figure it out in a more constructive, more precise way.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm going to add a button.
Okay.
I'm going to call this button change color, and let me give this button an ID. Give the ID of change color as well. So let's just make sure this looks as you expect.
At this time, I think it's okay.
I'm pretty sure it's okay, but I also just want to have Ripple running in the background, so I have change color going on.
Okay.
And if I go back into Visual Studio, though, notice that what we're actually showing you is the DOM Explorer. If you're familiar with in-browser development tools, especially debugging tools either from Chrome or from IE's F12, you always have a mechanism for being able to inspect the visual look and feel of what your page looks like. Yeah. And so right now, I'm going to select the click tool, and just go ahead and select the change color button, just to see what's going on. And when I click it, you can quickly see that my markup is highlighted, and any styles that I might have are actually shown right here. So what color should I go with, Eric?
Wow, a blue one?
Let's go with blue. Let's do Azure. Just, given that we're Microsoft, let's do Azure. And if I were to jump back into Visual Studio, the Chrome, you can very quickly see that the value specified here is being displayed and updated in real time in Ripple as well. Yeah. So you can make a lot of visual tweaks just by using the functionality you're probably already familiar with. If you have a browser-based workflow that you love and you're very familiar with, our goal is to really not have you learn or relearn all of these things from scratch, but actually just take advantage of what you already know. So that's part of that's something that I want to show off. So that's the only reason, Eric, why I hit F5 after making this minor change. Okay. So now let's go ahead and add some code that actually reacts to me clicking on the change color button. So I'm going to go ahead and go into index.js. So actually, before I go there, I think it's worth talking about what device ready actually means. If you're building applications for the web, there are two events a big problem is figuring out when exactly your code needs to run. Yes. And the two events you often listen for are the load event, which fires after your DOM and after all your images and external resources. After all of them have loaded, that event fires and then your code can execute from there. Another event that is my personal favorite is DOM content loaded. You listen for that event after your DOM is loaded, but just before everything else has actually loaded as well. So if you want to have code that runs that manipulates the DOM, that's a great time to basically hook into it. because we're building apps that run on a device, having load or DOM content loaded isn't always a guarantee that your page is ready to react. You might need extra, time for getting your keyboard working, or like external, input from plugins like your camera or your accelerometer. They might take extra time. So we have a custom event called device ready that is in many ways the equivalent of load, but it is optimized for device-specific scenarios.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's very useful. You will see device ready event in many Cordova projects. That's the root event.
Yeah, I think it's like the general guidance is, whatever you do, make sure you do whatever important things after the device ready event has been fired. So, I'm sure. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. We have two other events here: pause and resume.
Yep, I'm going to leave these as is. I have no need to modify them.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do though is let me quickly go ahead and I could just write code manually, but I'm just going to copy and paste some code just to save some time. And let's go ahead and paste this here. All right, so all I've really done is I've added a variable called change color button, and I'm using the query selector function on document to get access to the element whose ID is change color. So nothing fancy going on here. And just like before, I'm adding an event listener for the click button, and for the click event. And so when that button is clicked, the set random color event handler will essentially get called. And this event is basically calling, getting a hook into the body element, and it's setting the inline background color to a particular value. But just to make sure that everything still works fine, let's go with yellow. Let's just make sure that code up until this point works fine. So I'm going to go ahead and
let's try it.
I have no doubt that it will work, but you never know, right?
Oh yes.
Change color? Yeah, it works fine. So our code up until this point is fine. So what I really want to do though is not have a hard-coded color value. What I really want to show is a random color that changes the color of the background every time I click it. So for that I have the getRandomColor function, and this function is pretty simple. All it does is it creates a random RGB color value, puts it into the right format, and then just returns it in the way that your application would expect it. So all I'm going to do is just replace this with getRandomColor.
Call to the function, okay.
And that's all I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and hit play now. So I'm going to click change color, and oh my gosh, it is not working, Eric. I mean,
there is a bug in your function.
There's a bug. Always when I'm demoing, stuff never just works, right? All right. So now let's try to figure out how to fix it. So there are many ways you can do this. You can write console.log, because it is a web. You can also write alert statements. There's no wrong way to diagnose and debug your code. As long as it works for you.
Personally, I love the breakpoint approach.
Absolutely, the breakpoints, you can't beat that. So let me actually just set a breakpoint just right here, just to figure out what value is actually being returned by getRandomColor. So I set a breakpoint and I hit F5, and now let's see what's going on. The application loads fine. I'm going to click on the button, and yes, the breakpoint gets hit. So now, body element, all the stuff is fine. GetRandomColor is returning the function value. Let's figure out what getRandomColor actually returns. Let me go back to let's go to the immediate window, and let me just type in getRandomColor. And it returns a hex value, 7CE9AD. So that seems to be fine.
Yeah.
But can you tell me what is actually wrong with this, though? There's actually something subtle that's wrong with the value that is being returned.
The format of the value, perhaps?
Correct. The format of the value. It's almost as if we rehearsed this beforehand, Eric.
No.
No, this is actually true. This is completely live. We did not rehearse this beforehand,
I
guys.
just discovered the code at the same time as you guys.
The format is actually wrong. It is a hex. It is a value. It is hexadecimal, but there needs to be a pound sign in the front that needs to be recognized by your CSS. So the way to fix that is I'm going to go to my code, and where it says var hex color, where I'm returning the values, I'm just going to do some simple string concatenation and just do this. And hopefully with this, it'll all work fine. I'm actually not even going to set a breakpoint because I have such great faith that Eric's debugging ability have not led me astray. So I'm going to hit the button, change color, and the color changes, Eric.
Okay.
This is beautiful. This is all day, guys. We have, 23 minutes? I'm going to do this all day. All right. So that's a very quick overview of using Ripple for making some simple changes to your application, and then diagnosing and fixing issues by using some of the debugging stuff. So now let's go back to our slides for a second.
Yeah.
And
well, One question for you.
Yeah.
What happened behind the scenes?
Happens behind the scenes. We talk a lot about Cordova. We talk a lot about, it just works on devices. But I think it's definitely helpful to take a step back and just look at how does your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript end up working in a device context? Like what exactly makes it, happen? So I created a few slides that help with this. So behind the scenes, you saw a little bit about the web view control that David was talking about.
Yes.
And what happens in a device is no different. You basically have a native application that has some functionality for displaying some HTML content. For iOS and Android, it is a web view container. And for Windows web applications, the HTML apps you run for Windows Store and Windows Phone, you have what's known as WWA host.
Yeah.
And all they do is they take your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, give you some additional functionality, and have the ability to connect to the device capabilities despite using just JavaScript that runs in a security context that is optimized for the web app. And this is a very high-level diagram that talks about how application code, and the one part that sticks out of your application and actually goes into your device is the plugin that that Eric talked about a little earlier, and we'll talk about a little more. That's basically the bridge between what you're writing and device capabilities your application requires. Because one thing you guys might not realize is that, if I'm running on a desktop, and let's say I'm using the webcam, for example, right? I can just get user media, everything works just fine. When I'm viewing that exact same application on a mobile browser, not a mobile app, but a mobile browser, the security settings on a browser prevent some of these functionality from working as you'd expect. So you actually have to have this plug-in mechanism and the Cordova syntax for it to bypass and to work with the security model that all these devices.
Exactly. After the meal break, we will have a session focused on the difference between WebView and the WWA host in Windows.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So I will not steal the thunder from that session anymore then. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, let's continue.
So we talked about in a very high level what exactly is happening. But we talked about a very low level on what's happening. Let's actually take a bird's eye view of what's going to happen. So when you're building an application for Cordova, there are two components that have pretty much been the mainstay, the dynamic duo of what Visual Studio has always been about. That is Visual Studio and MS Build. MS Build, you probably use it for building your applications from Visual Basic to C# to C++. It is a very flexible component that is used for all sorts of project management systems, from build project management systems. And what we're adding on top of it is we're saying we're going to extend MS Build by having some of its output going to the yellow box known as VSMDA. That is the extension that you basically install. And that then massages the content a little bit and pass it on to Cordova. For Windows and Android, it goes straight to Cordova, which then does its work to provide the final packages, the APK for Android or the Apex files for Windows, and the equivalent packages for iOS, the .app packages. And for iOS, though, we have one extra step. On the slide, if you go to the right-hand side of it, you'll see that the VSMDA actually has another component, and these components run entirely on the OS X side of things.
That means I can develop for my macOS from Visual Studio without touching my Macintosh.
That is. So there will be some level of touching you will still have to do, though, Eric. And I'm going to demo that in a little bit.
Sure.
You have to install some components, and you also have to run a command line tool to actually have it running. So before I get there,
an agent.
Exactly.
But the principle is the fact is I stay in Visual Studio and deploy on my Mac, on my iPad or something like that without touching its code, right?
That is exactly correct. And let's say you have an environment where someone has already configured a build machine running on a Mac, for example. In that case, you don't have to do anything. You just basically hit F5 and just choose an iOS debug target, just like I chose a Ripple target, and you're golden.
Oh, I love it.
All right. So let's go to the next slide. Just there's one of the best things about what we released is our documentation. We have excellent documentation. So we go into great detail on how to set up your machine for building on a Mac. But just at a very high level, there's two things you need to do to build on the iOS. I'm going to demo this, which is why I'm giving you a quick overview of what to do. You need to install the VSMDA remote agent. It's a node package, pretty simple, run that, it just works. And then the next step is to basically run the agent so that it's always listening for communication from Visual Studio in this case to process a build.
Okay, and they are going to build in a certain directory for that.
Correct.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to demo this now. It's going to be exciting, So all right. So I'm back in my machine. So this is a browser. This is basically Ripple showing an Android app, and pay attention to what the change color button looks like. Sharp corners and edges. And the reason why I'm calling this out because you'll see there's a difference in how it renders on iOS.
Okay. Okay.
So
let's see that.
yeah, because Ripple is great, but if you want to do, if you want to ratchet up the fidelity where you're testing, emulator is a great mechanism, and so is ultimately, of course, testing on a device. And for iOS especially, I'm going to talk a little bit about how some of the things that look right on Windows might not look right when tested on iOS.
Okay.
So this is a great way to look into that.
Okay.
So I'm just going to first select an iOS platform. And once I've done that, we also give you the option for device, and Ripple makes an appearance here as well. So if I didn't want to actually do any kind of configuration, Ripple does an okay job approximating what's happening.
Okay.
It's not perfect, as you will see in a second, but I'm simulating an iPhone 5 using Ripple, and the functionality still works. If I had any
Okay.
code that used the WebKit prefix, for example, Ripple will respect that, and it will show it all just fine.
It's good.
So,
Okay.
but let's go to the part that that everyone is really excited for,
Yeah.
building on the iOS. So I'm gonna test on, let's say, the iPad. Let's say iPhone simulator. So I haven't done any configuration yet, Eric. I'm just basically very naively selecting iPhone, and I'm gonna hit play. And this is not gonna work, and you'll see why. And okay, this is taking its time right now, but it's not going to work. Basically, what you need to do, there are two things you need to do.
Yeah,
Let's go
we
to
have to
Tools
configure.
Options.
Yeah.
And by default, we have this actually disabled. So I'm going to go to Multi-Device Hybrid Apps, find the Remote Agent Configuration. So I've already set this up earlier. By default, it's set to false. You need to set this to true, and then pass in the machine that is going to be listening for these events. So and as we were doing this, it appropriately failed, saying that error occurred upon the build server. Timeout, because that build server isn't actually running. So let's go ahead and get this started. So I'm going to go back. I'm running Parallels right now.
Oh.
So I'm going to go back into the OS X side of things, and let me just bring up my terminal. So what I'm going to do is just start my VSMDA remote. This is the same command you saw earlier, and I'm putting the builds into a user's group of builds directory.
Okay.
And I'm going to hit Enter.
Okay, so the agent is listening for Visual Studio messages.
Exactly. It's basically now just running the background, just polling and seeing what any updates there are. And if you remember from if I go back into Visual Studio, one of the options we need to specify is the IP address and the port. The port is 3000. You can see from the command line window itself.
Okay.
The host address is what I need to figure out next. And so for that, I'm actually going to open up another terminal window. And there are many ways of doing it. This is the way I tend to use it. I use ifconfig, and I wrote a small script that basically, ifconfig by itself is actually, let me just show you what ifconfig does, just in case you are curious. Let me remove all of this. I hope it remembered my earlier settings. ifconfig is similar to like ipconfig in Windows. It gives you a lot of information about what you're currently doing. But let me just filter all this out and only give me the IP address I care about.
Okay.
So this is the one, 10.82.208.8. So I don't believe copy is currently enabled. So I'm going to quickly just note this down as somewhere. Let me go to one of the desktops here, and I'm just launching Notepad for those of you who can't see what I'm doing on this oversized novelty screen.
Okay.
10.82.208.8. All right. So now I need to make sure in Visual Studio that I enter the exact same value. Otherwise, my computer VS would have no idea how to connect to the build agent side of it. All right. 208.8. Okay. All right. So if everything works fine, I'm going to hit play. And it is currently, uploading build request payload, attempt 1. It's always scary when a number comes up. Attempt number 2. And so behind the scenes, it's actually being sent to the OS X side of things.
Okay.
And now the build has succeeded, and you will see the iPhone simulator running, and now you get to see change color showing up here.
Yeah.
And if I click on the button, you'll see that
it's working.
It works just fine.
Yeah.
And the thing to note that, before I emphasize to pay attention to what the button looks like in Ripple the button was basically square shaped.
Yes.
And it had no translucency or transparency that you kind of see on an iOS simulator. There are subtle differences like this that really only shine when you're testing closer to the platform you're building on. So as great as Ripple is, the iOS simulator is just a little bit better for testing iOS apps. Just Android emulator is better for testing some Android emulator apps. And then, of course, a device is one of the best ways of being able to test as well.
Yeah.
So
pretty amazing. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Can I debug step by step from Visual Studio to my Mac OS here?
Currently it is not supported, but it is high on our list. So I would say very soon you should be able to set a breakpoint, step into your code and see all the iOS debugging functionality work just as it would for any other flavor that we actually support.
Okay. So right now I debug in Ripple.
Yep.
Test on my iPad or iPad simulator. Okay.
Correct. You know, you can. Yes, there are many other ways you can use some of the web tools that exist for iOS to connect to it. You can use the equivalent of Process Monitor. There are many complicated ways, but no, we have a much easier way that's hopefully will be out in the near future.
Okay.
Great.
Some more demo, perhaps?
Let's do some more demo. Yeah, why not?
Cool.
Why not? I mean, everything's working fine so far. So
I really enjoyed it.
We had to crash something.
I don't know you, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Otherwise, this can't be a demo that we're giving as as part of Visual Studio. So all right. So basically, one of the things we talked about is plugins. We said plugins is really great, and we want to see what happens how to work on plugins. So I'm going to go ahead and open a new project. I created a project already. I'm going to give you a quick demo of what it looks like. And this project is a simple note-taking app. I know every demo needs to have a good to-do application. So I'm just going to hit F5, and for this I'm going to stick back. I'm going to go back to the. Let's go back to Ripple. Let's do an Android device again. They're just so much fun to preview. I'm just going to hit play, and this will give you an idea of what the application looks like. And right now we're texting on a Nexus S device. And so basically, I had some pre-canned content that I was hoping wasn't going to show up here. Luckily, it's all fine. And it's basically a note-taking app. I can type in, finish this demo.
Okay.
For reals. And when I hit enter, you'll see the item appearing here, and I can make changes. I can, delete an item once I've done it. Test totally works, so far. So I can delete it. We'll ignore that what I deleted was not the item that was actually removed. That's a minor demo bug, all right? But what I'm going to do, though, is I want to add a plugin. Right now, it's a simple app. It's deleting items as I'm adding things to it. Wouldn't it be great to actually delete items if I were to actually shake the device? Like, a lot of apps have the functionality where if you shake the app, either a help screen comes up or you get the ability to feedback.
You're right.
How about, I'm so frustrated having no more tasks to do that I shake it and then, it clears everything out. So let's go ahead and test that very easily.
Okay.
So in order to be able to do that, to be able to add some functionality for shaking the application, that requires access to device APIs. And those APIs are, by default, turned off in all these applications for security reasons.
Yeah, sure.
And as Eric mentioned earlier, the way you enable them is by using what's known as a Cordova plugin.
Yeah.
And these plugins can contain are basically a bridge between a JavaScript you write and the specific native functionality you expose. And there's basically a fork for Android, for iOS, for Windows, Bada, BlackBerry, all the platforms that that Apache Cordova supports. It is the plugins help mediate between making sure it works on the device itself.
So you add a tab about plugging here.
Right. So what I'm doing is, a lot of these are specified in the config.xml file. So you could edit the config.xml file manually. And this is basically the file that, you might have seen David, Eric show off. I can make these changes myself. Or, why write code when I can do some of these things, especially like custom markup, when I can use an editor for this. So I double-click on config.html in Visual Studio, and you basically get our config, config editor, config designer. Here I can specify settings like my display name, the start page, the package ID, things like that. Any security settings, all these things are fine. Packaging, all these things are just, specific
a graphical way
of specifying, often arcane, obtuse information. The thing I really want to talk about, though, is a plugins tab.
Oh.
Out of the box, we give you the ability to support all these various plugins. And us, for example, selecting the accelerometer, for example, isn't just a case of me checking a box, nothing happens. We actually acquire the plugin as part of build, and we do a lot of things behind the scenes to make it easier for you to basically just take advantage of the accelerometer, not have to worry about how to get them into your project. This goes back to one of the values that I think Visual Studio really provides. Okay,
so you have the core list of Cordova plugin, I think, here.
Yep.
And if I want more, I have to go by hand on the XML file, right?
Correct. Okay. So, we're running short on time, so I'm going to go ahead and open a finished version of my project. It actually contains all the code that I need. So it's coming in a zip file, actually. And we already have a folder there. Let me open temp, paste this in, and let's go ahead and open this. Okay. When it says this may take a few minutes, it's usually not lying. So I'm hoping it doesn't take, it does not take a few minutes.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and project is open. Let's test it in Ripple. And there's a reason why I'm testing in Ripple, actually. Let me actually take a look at what the accelerometer code looks like, just so you have an idea of, let me go back into,
Visual Studio.
this is the wrong app. Let me go back into Visual Studio. Let me just open up init.js, where the code lives for being able to access the accelerometer. It's right here, navigate.accelerometer.watch acceleration. And then the code basically just checks for simple acceleration, where I'm checking the x, y, and z coordinates to make it work. And nice thing about Ripple is that one of the functionalities that I highlighted earlier is the ability to mimic a lot of device settings.
Yep.
And one of the things actually is the acceleration. Wow, that's a hard word. So you can see at the very bottom, there's I can click and drag the mouse to manipulate the device, great. But also a shake functionality, where if I click it, it basically moves the screen back and forth. Let me just zoom out a bit and see if you can see more of the screen. Perfect. I'm going to hit shake, and once I do that, you'll see the entire application shaking. And as a result, though, the item still went out of the screen. So Ripple is fantastic at being able to do that. And I also, for those of you who are watching, I actually have a physical screen, a device as well. And imagine if I were to plug this in and hit F5 and deploy the device, you'll see the exact Note app right here. And if I were to shake it wildly, you'll see the items delete themselves as well. So just imagine how awesome it would be if it works. And I'll just pause as you get to just gaze in amazement at this working. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and start going to the wrap-up slides onto the resources, and let's see what else is there.
Some additional resources here. Of course, you can download the extension in hackims.cordova.
And one of the things we've done is that even if you're using Visual Studio to set up your machine, it takes time. It takes, sometimes takes about 20 minutes, sometimes it takes about an hour or 2 hours, depending on your connection. And you also, because what we're building is still pre-release software, it still has some bugs in it, we're working through them. You may not want to have your main development machine, take up, pre-release content. So to help you evaluate them, we actually created both Azure VMs that you can connect to and run directly without having to have anything configured on your machine. And we also have like a massive, like VHD you can download from the Microsoft Download Center that gives you everything you need, both Windows and Visual Studio, evaluation versions of both, that give you everything out of the box to build the Cordova app.
The experience with the VM, the live VM, it's pretty amazing. We used that last week during the PhoneGap Day.
Correct.
We organized a workshop, and we have several guys connected with a teeny connection, but everyone can work. It's pretty
exactly.
Cool.
I mean, the best part of
Thanks
the VM,
for that. And for the team for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best part of the VMs is that oftentimes you might need to have Hyper-V enabled, Hyper-V disabled. Depending on which emulators you want to try out, your computer might not have, like, let's say SLAT for some of the CPU-based, emulators that might be disabled. So you kind of don't have to worry too much about your hardware configuration. You can use a high-powered device or a very low-powered device and still be, very productive in, building these apps for real or for just evaluating things and seeing how it works. And then the last couple of things are, we do want to hear feedback from people, and if you do run into some issues, we posted, our team is very active on Stack Overflow. We monitor all of the comments, and we try to respond to you very quickly. So just post on Stack Overflow, use the hashtag multi-device hybrid apps, and we will get to us. And if you want to tweet to us, VS Cordova Tools, you can email the product team directly at vscordovatools@microsoft.com, or if you want to, email me, just feel free to email me as well, krupa@microsoft.com.
Okay. Very nice. Thank you a lot, Krupa, about this presentation. I think we are really enjoyed the integration in Visual Studio. I really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well, Eric.
Sure. So now we are going to have a meal pause, a long break, about 1 hour. See you later. So, bye.
Hi there, and welcome back. I hope you had a great meal, and also I hope you had a great experience with the previous sessions talking about Apache Cordova to be used for cross-platform development using web technologies. The actual module is about looking closer into what kind of issues you will face when bringing HTML5 and JavaScript code to build a cross-platform app. And here with me, I have Paul.
Hi, nice to meet everyone.
Paul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I can do that. My name is Paul Gilday. I'm a program manager on the Web Frameworks team, or more known as on the WinJS team. I've spent a couple years here at Microsoft. I've worked on the UI platform from components in Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, and the past 2 years I've been on the WinJS team. I've been working with the team really hard to bring the library cross-platform as well as cross-device using Apache Cordova. So yeah.
Great. So we were talking since this morning about the ways you can bring that web code onto applications. And there's one specific thing that is happening with Windows platforms in the way you can bring that web code. The one thing is actually that there's native support on the app platform for JavaScript and HTML5.
Right, that's
so
correct.
that comes with lots of goods, as in the integration into the development tools, the way you can do debugging, document inspection in Visual Studio. That gives you a level of control on that code, which is awesome.
Yes.
However, because
Yes.
there is an however,
Yes.
things are not always super nice in life, and so you won't have to cope with something specific around the security model. So if you want to touch a little bit about that exactly, what is specific in the Windows app platform support for JavaScript to Windows that you don't have on other platforms when doing cross-platform with JavaScript?
Yeah, and so with great power comes great responsibility. And the interesting thing with our platform is that, especially in the context of Apache Cordova, Karupa on the previous talk talked about the different models that they use to actually implement Cordova under the hood. And so in the iOS and Android versions, you're essentially in a web view, and then you marshal calls back and forth out of that web view to the native platform. But on the Windows platform, we support HTML natively, meaning that you have local access to the APIs, and so we don't have to do that marshaling call. And so the JavaScript that you're running essentially has full access to WinRT underneath. And so, especially in some of the ways of the web, a lot of those responsibilities have been taken care of you by the sandbox that you have in the browser. So you can't, essentially do bad things to an end user. And so, on the Windows platform, you have a lot more control, but now you have to be a little more conscious of what scripts that you're using, what you're including, and what those scripts do.
Okay. So there's more responsibility in the developer's hands. However, there's also some control that the Visual Studio tools actually will add.
Yes.
And you're going to show us there's a specific error you might run into when you bring your JavaScript code, and you'll show us how that works. Just bringing a library from out there, dropping that into a Windows application, and boom, when you start it, you get that big message.
Yeah, and so I'll just switch over to the slides here, and if you have any familiarity with building a Windows 8 application using third-party libraries, you might actually run into this issue. And so we can actually switch over to Visual Studio to see this in action.
While you're switching, I'm wondering also, so why would we do that to developers? Like, why actually would we not just expose the same, functionalities and APIs as in a web context? So the reasons for doing that actually are beyond they're about security for the final user, right?
Yes, I guess there's two things. When we were thinking about the Cordova implementation, we wanted to have as fast performance as possible. A lot of in the debate between HTML5 versus native application programming, it's all about performance and that native feel. And so we could have taken a route where we web viewed the content, but we would still have to marshal back and forth. And so since we don't do that, we give you that direct access to that. And so we feel that was the right decision moving forward. But yes, we're going to have to use the developer. We'll have to understand some of those implications that we've made.
Got it. So it's really about understanding that you're running in a different context.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Show us actually the kind of things that you're not allowed to do, or that are flagged as unsafe in your code.
Sure. Yeah. So in this example here, I'm just including a common JavaScript library that most of you probably use. This is AngularJS. And so I'm just going to run this in the context of a Windows application. So I've just included it. I think this is version 1.3.
So you just created a Windows Store app using JavaScript support.
Yep.
And that's what you get. For those who are not familiar with Windows Store app, you can see that you have a CSS folder, JavaScript folder.
Yep.
So that's very common to any other web application. You see not index.html, but default.html.
Sure.
But that's exactly the same thing as if that thing was running on a server as an app, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
A web app.
Exactly.
Good.
Yeah. So hopefully if we click go here, we'll get our breakpoint and our error.
Nice.
And so this is good. Well, yeah, and it's bad, right? So we're going to break, and this is where it becomes problematic for the developer. Is that so we're breaking actually inside of AngularJS's code, and if I'm a developer using that third-party library, I might not be fluent in all of the programming models that is built into WinJS or built into AngularJS, and so that could be a really tough blocker for me.
Yep. And if you start like venturing into making changes to the framework for your own use, actually next time you get an update to the framework, you have to go through these changes again. So it's definitely not viable. I would say as a solution, go tinker yourself with the code to adapt it to Windows platform.
Yes, yeah, you will definitely incur a big maintenance cost for your application. And so to answer the question that you were talking about before is what type of interactions that are considered blockers in the security model essentially is around DOM manipulation and more specifically around script injection. So this is your inner HTMLs, your insert adjacent HTMLs where the platform might not know where that code is coming from, and they might not know that there's inline script that will be immediately executed once it gets inserted into the DOM.
Got it. So is it something that in the philosophy is about being super safe because you don't know that code, so when the application goes through the Windows Store certification, there's no way to verify that piece of code that will end up in the application being injected by that piece of JavaScript code, right?
Right, that's correct, yeah. And so as part of that is that we're considered in the local host. So those files are actually installed in the application package, and those go through the store and they go through certification. And so the end user will know that any JavaScript application that they download from the store is considered a safe and verified application. As soon as you allow remote code running from some remote server somewhere, you break that trust.
Okay. Great. So the code is dumped in the function here in your application here, breaks.
Yes.
What do you do?
What do you do? Okay. Well, the first thing you do is you can go actually look at the error message, and you can actually see the details of how to actually not work around, but work with the security policies that we've put in place. Could be assuming you're using your own JavaScript library, right? Right, yeah. Or even
you want to inject without even using something from
even
the
your own code might want to talk to your server and get some remote script that you need to auto-update very quickly that you won't be able to push through the store. And if you trust that content, then there are some things that you can do to allow that content to run. But that's in very specific cases. And so this documentation kind of walks you through some of the various mechanisms that are allowed in that context to work with the platform to enable that type of functionality.
Are they specific? So you mentioned inner HTML. Are there specific APIs you can think of like that are to be flagged as, okay, you might have an issue if you have that in your JavaScript framework?
Yes, and so actually this one's a great one where it talks about the automatic script filtering. This is actually the exact same example that we've been talking about, especially with doing append childs, inserts, any type of I'm adding more markup to my document, essentially, that may or may not have inline script. And so by default, we do try to do some filtering and try to make some inert script, but we give you some of the tools that allow you to do that if you are familiar with that code base and the code that you're using to actually declare that it's safe content. And so I believe as we scroll down here, there's a couple of methods here where it's to static HTML, where you can still do inner HTML, but by calling this function, it makes all of your script tags inert, essentially, so that you're not actually running any inline script.
So you're doing a conscious decision of doing that, right?
Right.
As a developer.
Yes. And so if you're working with your own code, that might be very easy to do. But if you're working with a third-party library, then it's like you have to go through a whole bunch of someone else's project, issue a pull request, have a conversation, which might take a while because they have their own backlog that they're working through. And
then you end up working your own fork. And then when the main branch changes,
it might change.
Break your own fork. And so we know the story.
Yeah. But one of the things that I'd like to mention is that I think we work directly with jQuery to help alleviate this issue.
Yeah, so actually Microsoft Open Technologies, when we're looking at the first release of Windows 8 and with the newly arrived JavaScript HTML5 support a year and a half ago, Microsoft Open Tech was in deep integration and work with various open source communities out there. And what we wanted to do is to say, okay, so what are the most used JavaScript framework? Let's go out and contribute to them to make them just work on the Windows app platform. So we did that with jQuery, and since jQuery 2.0, the contribution from Microsoft OpenTech make jQuery compatible with the security model on Windows Store apps. So that's good, works well. To be honest, it's a lot of maintenance on the jQuery side of things, and the contributions, we have to follow up on them, making sure that it's still there. Things are broken, we have to refix them. So that's obviously something that is impacted by the actual culture of the web developers, where doing this kind of thing, injecting dynamic HTML and manipulating the DOM are very powerful, and there are things that developers commonly use.
Yeah.
So fighting against that, as in trying to educate developers, changing the way of developing, will take time. And in that case, after contributing to jQuery 2.0, we're just like, okay, so we won't go out and ourselves contribute to every other JavaScript framework. How about we adapt things on our side? Let's start with a shim, very commonly used in the web development, and see how we can, appease or make it less a problem for web developers to integrate the JavaScript code. And this is where the JavaScript Compat library is coming.
Yes, exactly. And we recently released this was it OSCON, I believe, was one of the conferences?
Summer.
Yeah, this summer. And so in order to kind of help bring this solution to all types of JavaScript libraries, our team worked on building this Windows Store JavaScript compat shim. And so if you go to, and it's open source, it was released by MS OpenTech, and you can see here our main GitHub. We talked about that very similar error that you'll see when building applications.
And I'm seeing some names of commonly used JavaScript frameworks, and we see Angular, Ember, Knockat. These are not just like the random ones. They're the ones that are used on actual websites today in mass,
traction,
production.
Yeah, exactly. And so, as this starts to scale out, I mean, there's Dojo, there's Backbone, you just can start listing off the JavaScript libraries. And so obviously it's not scalable for us to go talk to each one of those guys, and then we'll be getting requests to say, oh well, no, talk to my favorite JavaScript library, please, Microsoft. And so that's exactly what this shim was made for.
Got it.
And so the nice thing about this is that you just get the shim, and then you just include it.
I like the description of the problem is like 10 paragraphs. Instructions is like 2 lines.
Yes.
Show us.
Here's the solution. So hopefully in this application here, so let's go to the default. I've already included the shim here, and so if I uncomment this line, hopefully the demo gods will be with me here. And so hopefully when I click go, my app is up and running. I don't see the error, and now I can start building an Angular app on the Windows platform. And we think that's goodness.
Yep. So that means that load time, so that the Windows app platform, when loading the JavaScript framework, didn't see any issue, right, with the code in there. And this is because you put the JS Compat library just before.
Right.
So eventually I'm curious to see a bit about the code of that library to see what it does, because the magic that happens here, kind of like making safe things that are unsafe, is very interesting.
Right, yes, exactly. And so one of the things that we'll look at before is that we're actually using the same platform-supported APIs that we have documented here in this MSDN documentation about building secure applications. Okay. And so
there's nothing magic Microsoft-y in there. It's
exactly.
just like anyone could have done that library, actually. We're just like contributing that to the community for making their life easier, right?
Exactly. And so we looked at kind of the common cases that web frameworks, the patterns that they used in terms of putting dynamic elements and scripts into the DOM. And so we can kind of step through some of this here, but you can kind of already start to see that we're kind of stubbing out some of these DOM manipulation APIs here. And as I scroll down just a little bit, you can see this is some helper code here that helps empty some things. But now you can start to see inserted JSON HTML. This is a fun one here where you can actually start putting in different strings of HTML in different parts of your document. And you can see that we're stubbing out these calls so that it'll actually go through our shim first before reaching the DOM. And so we actually do a cleanse of that code that's very similar to the code that is done in the platform. But for certain patterns that we've seen done in JavaScript libraries that we believe that are safe, and we've looked at them and we've validated them across other JavaScript libraries as well with the shim to allow some of that content to go in, but still maintaining the level of security and thus maintaining the same level of trust that an end user can expect when downloading that application.
Great. Okay. So that means you're not inserting a security flaw into your app doing that and using that script.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. And so, when it comes to basically, if you have code that is not compliant and it's flagged as unsafe, you cannot not only just run the app, but you can't go through the store certification, right? So you just cannot publish. So how about now when you have the JavaScript compat library in your code? So basically, you're still in your code using the usual API that are unsafe, and you have the JavaScript compat library in front of it. Is it because you're using the JS compat library from the Microsoft OpenText project that you're allowed it through the store? Is it something that actually flags that one as safe? And if you're using your own mechanism to do, like tags as safe the code, is that a difference? Do you have to use that JavaScript library compat actually to go through the store? That's, I think, the question.
Right. Yeah. So there's no secret sauce or no magic. We're using the platform in the way that it was designed and intended, and so you yourself could have written this shim if you wanted to, and still pass store certification. We did it in a way that we believed would help most and address most of the pain points of developers using third-party libraries. Yeah. So there's no secret sauce. This is the special JavaScript clear list that you can use for applications.
Great. So in the same order, of idea, that means that you still, as a developer, has to be careful what you put in your code, right? It's not a pass. Yeah. It's not a pass to just do whatever you want in your code and expose the user data on the application to issues.
Yes, no, that's very important. And so you as a developer should be very conscious of the code that you actually include, have at least an understanding of what it's doing and how it's manipulating the application. Because essentially it's your job to ensure that the actions that you're partaking are trustworthy to end user.
Now, that said, there's a topic I want to relate to the overall day today, which is about cross-platform development.
Yes.
So is that issue with the security model something that is specific only to the Windows Store platform, or can we consider that there are other platforms trying to use JavaScript to do native apps or to exploit the same kind of model that will be exposed to the same kind of issue?
Yeah, I think actually we're seeing this today with Chrome apps. They have a similar concept of running HTML and JavaScript and CSS locally as an application, and they in fact also have a security policy. They use CSP as their security policy, and so I think for moving forward for HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript locally run applications that aren't in a web sandbox are going to face these issues moving forward. So this isn't a Microsoft only thing, a Windows only thing. It's a matter of ensuring that we're protecting end users for these locally run applications that could run remote JavaScript from a remote server.
Great. And so I have a last question that just came up during the discussion, so unscripted. Now, still in the context of developing a cross-platform application, let's say I'm using Cordova and I target iOS, Android, Windows, and I'm using Angular. And as you demoed, just dumping Angular in my Cordova app will certainly bring that alert message and my application as is will not work on Windows.
Right.
Now I'm adding the JS compat library. What's going to happen for iOS and Android? will they just discard things in terms of the JavaScript library, or should I actually have some code that says, if I'm on Windows platform, use this library, if not, don't use it?
Right, and so we've gone ahead and we've done that for you. And so if you look in our...
It was unscripted, but you were ready for that.
I know. I was like, oh, it's perfect. It's lobbing it up and we're just going to knock it out of the park. So we do the checks for you. And so we look to see if we're in the Windows local context. And if we are, then we will apply that needed filtering. If we're not, then we won't do it because we know that we're not in the Microsoft local context. If we're in an iOS or an Android app, we're going to be in the web context. And so the web context will essentially safeguard the end user from that code. And so you're able to use it without any negative impacts to maintenance your application. So you don't have to have a separate index.html in your merges folder, for example, just for Windows to include this one script, and in your other applications, you don't need to actually have that reference.
That's perfect. That's very much like cross-platform thinking. That's great.
Right. It's hopefully the write once, run anywhere mentality. Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. So what does it mean for the future? I mean, we have a solution here, which is in the form of a shim, and shim are known for being temporary things and solutions. What's going on for the next version? I know we can't spoil too much about what's going on for the next app platform, but I'm wondering in which direction is it going in terms of the security model, needing, not needing such a shim. Can you share a little bit about that?
I can talk a little bit about that in the sense that we know that there's a developer pain point, and it's our job to remove those pain points from the system. As well as we're looking at other platforms and looking at their security models, and we're trying to understand what's the best mix of the level of security and the level of productivity for developers. And so in the future, we hope to address developer pain points and make sure that we have models in place that give you that right balance of security and productivity for your applications. So.
Awesome, great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Paul. I guess you are now getting ready for your next session at WinJS, where once again we're going to talk about cross-platform using web technologies. Thanks for this great talk about the JavaScript compact library. I'm having a hard time saying the name of that compact.
We love complex names at Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. JS. What is the full name, by the way?
I have to actually look it up. I don't know it off the top of my head.
That's the worst.
Yes, the JavaScript Dynamic Content Shim for Windows Store apps.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so that was a talk about this thing. And we'll look forward to see you for the next one for WinJS. Still with Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, welcome back. I'm Paul Gilday. You might have seen me on the previous module. And so I'm here with Edgar Bangero. And today we're going to be talking about building cross-platform applications with WinJS. So Edgar, please introduce yourself.
So hi, I'm Edgar Bangero. I'm a senior software engineer here in the WinJS team. Working at Microsoft for almost 8 years in different web services, such as what is now known as Outlook.com and OneDrive. Previously, I worked on the Windows Web Apps platform, building the framework that enables developers to build applications in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Most recently, I worked with Paul and the WinJS team in our effort to bring the WinJS library cross-platform and ensuring that it works well in in Safari, in Chrome, in every browser, and especially with Cordova applications. And then I'm from Colombia, so I will add Spanish to the list of accents that you heard this morning. So let's get started.
Yeah. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover a little bit about what's WinJS, what's going on in WinJS. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive in some of these WinJS concepts, especially around our control model. And then once we've kind of learned those things, I'm going to hand it over to Edgar, and Edgar's going to show us a demo app that we built using Apache Cordova, WinJS, and he can we can kind of dissect it and show you the stuff that we've been doing to enable WinJS cross-platform. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is what is WinJS? And within that, I'm just going to give you a brief intro and show you kind of where our roadmap is. So WinJS today is a set of JavaScript toolkits. And we have two main toolkits. And the first toolkit is really around UI controls and widgets, specifically high-polished widgets that are centered around performance. And we believe that these widgets are great aspects to your application because we've designed them with both with all of touch, keyboard, mouse accessibility built right into the UI components. On the other side, we have lots of infrastructure so that you can scaffold out your application. We have things like a scheduler that lets you schedule all of your tasks for your UI and allows you to coordinate calls across it. We have data binding. We have a promises implementation that's very compatible with the new ES6 promises that are coming. And we have pages infrastructure, so a lot of good infrastructure to actually build up your application. And so many of you might not know is that we actually started this back in Windows 8 and with WinJS 1. And so this was originally a JavaScript library that developers used to build Windows 8 applications. And so if you look at our timeline here, fast forward to April, this past April at the Build conference, we announced that we were partnering with Microsoft OpenTech. Microsoft OpenTech released WinJS as an open source project, and we announced that we were going to take the project cross-browser and cross-device. This past September, we actually had our first cross-platform, cross-device release with WinJS 3.0, where we have a support matrix of a slew of desktop and mobile browsers. We worked heavily on making it modular and making sure that you could get it from your various package managers that you use today with all the other JavaScript libraries that you know and love. And so that's where we are in the future. You can kind of see what we're thinking about. And we're on GitHub, and we encourage you to go there and participate with us, issue pull requests, feature requests, what have you. We're really interested in what you, the developers, want to see in our library. And so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about some of just the basic WinJS concepts to get you up and running with a WinJS application. And so the three things that I'm going to touch on are how do you kind of bootstrap your app with WinJS, talk a little bit about the control model that we have so that you can instantiate controls and use them in your UI, and then we'll touch a little bit on data binding to kind of bring your application to life by marrying your data with your UI. Cool. So with that, I'm going to switch over to our try site here. And so since we went open source, you can see we have a nice plethora of controls, and Edgar's going to talk a little bit more about those specific controls. But here at the try site, we have interactive demos for you, and so hopefully I'll be able to code this demo straight up in our website. And so the first thing that I talked about was that we're going to talk a little bit about bootstrapping. And so like many other JavaScript libraries, we have a ready function, which kind of abstracts DOM content loaded, document load, all of that good stuff, so that you know that you're ready and up and running to run this application. We, like jQuery's $ready, we have our WinJS.application on ready function. And so the thing that we're going to do here is we're going to start building a demo. And so here I'm just going to give this demo a title here, and we'll just say rating demo. And so here we're going to actually be instantiating rating controls. And so the first thing to know about our control model is that there's three key aspects to it in order to instantiate a control. And so the first thing is you need an element. Next is you need a constructor. And then optionally, you can pass an object of configuration settings for that control. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a placeholder element. And I'm going to give it a class name of rating so that we know we can select it out of the DOM for later. And so we're going to do just that. So here I'm going to create a variable, and then I'm going to use the query selector method to actually go to the DOM, and then we're going to find our rating element, and we're going to scroll that away into a variable. And so the way that we initialize this control is we just call new with a constructor. And so I'm going to initialize a rating control, and we're going to call new. And most of our UI widgets live in the UI namespace. And so that's just UI rating. And in our constructor, you can see that we need to pass an element, and so a reference to our element, as well as any options for configuration on the data. And so I'm going to pass that element that we selected out of the DOM. I'm going to pass an initial user rating. We'll set that value to, actually, we'll set it to 3 in the middle here. And then we'll finish that code. And so hopefully, we've instantiated a rating control. That's great. And so if you can see here, as I hover over with my mouse, you can see the tentative rating is giving me hover feedback. I can click on each of the stars to commit that user rating. I can also, if I move the mouse here, I can keyboard around to use keyboard to set that tentative rating, press enter to commit that as well. Also, you notice as I touch on the screen here, I can set ratings, and I can also scrub over top of that. And so this is just an example of the type of care that we've put into all of our controls to ensure that we have the right input modality support. So you can take a WinJS control from a phone, scale it up to a tablet, to a desktop PC, and then scale that across other devices that may or may not have keyboards and mice attached to them, or touch-first devices such as your Android and your iOS devices. So that's pretty cool. Awesome. And so I showed you the programmatic side of how we knew up a control. Like many other JavaScript frameworks, we have some declarative ways of instantiating controls. And so I'm going to do that. And so interesting enough, we're actually going to build on top of this. And so before I do that, let's look over at the HTML. And so the way that that I declare a control is the same way that I would do imperatively, is that I need an HTML element, I need a constructor, and I need options configuration. And so we decided to leverage the HTML5 data dash attributes to do this. And so I can type data win control, and then pass that the same winjs.ui.rating constructor that we used in the previous example. And then to pass in our configuration data, we use data win options. And we have a very similar JSON-like syntax to do that. And so I'll say user rating, and we'll set this to 2. And then on our script side, we need to process that markup in order to instantiate that control. And we use that with the control processor, and that lives in the UI namespace. So if I type in winjs.ui.processAll, and so what this will do is when we call this, it will comb through our HTML document. It'll find all of the instances of our data win controls. It'll hook up our constructor with the options configuration, and then marry that with the HTML element that we've attributed with these attributes. And so hopefully, now you'll see that we have still our same rating control with a rating of 2. I can also add in some more configuration just to ensure that this is live running code. So I can set a max rating here, and we'll set that to 10. And so hopefully on the output here, now you can see that this output is generating and instantiating our controls with the things that we want and we need. So the final thing that I was going to talk a little bit about is data binding. And if you'll see in our future sample that we do a lot of data binding in our application. We think this is kind of a first-class concept. And so we talked about programmatic side, the declarative side of control instantiation. And so we have similar concepts for binding as well. And so I'm going to choose to just kick off with some declarative data binding. And so we use the same data dash attributes. So I'll type in data win, bind. And for our binding expressions, we can bind to essentially anything that's a property in the JavaScript domain. And so we think this is really handy so that as you become more comfortable with our binding system, anything that you can bind to, any property that you can set in JavaScript essentially becomes a bindable property in our binding system. And so in this specific case, I'm going to bind to the ratings, the user rating property. And the way that we do that is that there's a well-known property that we apply to HTML elements called the win control property. And this gives us an instance to our control. And then off of that, I can bind to a user rating. And so this expression is property colon source. And so we're going to pass in some data, and we'll show you that on the other side of the imperative side. And we're going to set that to our data and our rating value. So let's go back over into our script, and let's kind of set up some of our data here. And so let me click here, and we'll put this down here. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a namespace. I'm going to use WinJS's namespace define function. We're going to create the namespace app. Inside of that app namespace, we're going to create a context object. Inside of that context object, we're going to have a data object, and that's all we need. And so the interesting thing with our binding, like our control instantiation, there's kind of three key parts that you need to understand when using data binding. And those parts are, is you have some data object. That could be an array, it could be an object with properties on it. You have some piece of UI that has properties that you want to bind to. And then we wrap that together with an observable proxy that kind of connects those two things together. And then as you update that observable proxy, the UI will update for your binding. And so actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of preset some of this stuff up, and I'm going to have an event handler, and we're going to call this we'll set this up as our add1 event handler, because we're going to be changing some values. And WinJS actually has a nice little helper function here that marks our event handler supported for processing. And so we'll leave this empty for now, but this will help us set up in the future. Perfect. Okay, great. And so now you can imagine after you've called process all, which is an asynchronous method, so this returns a promise. And so once that promise completes, we need to go do some work. And so some of that work is that you can imagine going to talk to your data service on the back end, get some JSON blob, do a JSON.parse on it, and now you have some object model that you want to bind to your UI. And so in lieu of doing all that, we'll just bind to some static data. And so the way that we do that is we use winjs.binding.as. And so we're just going to pass this in an object that has a rating property, and we'll set that rating to 6 here. So actually, you know what, we'll set it to 1. So we'll want to show some of the cool binding stuff. Great. And then what we'll do is we'll export that as part of our data context. So if I do data app.context.data equals winjs.binding.as of our data object, so we've now exposed that as an observable proxy. And so now the way that we wire up our declarative binding is with our binding processor. So very similar to our control processor is our binding processor. That lives in the binding namespace. And so I just call process all. And then I apply null here, so that just means, hey, let's do this over the entire DOM. And then I'm going to pass in that context. And so hopefully, with all of the correct magic, when I hit output, we'll see if this actually worked. Great, it worked first time, awesome. You'll see that we have our rating, instead of statically defining it in our options in our HTML, and actually you can see, look, it actually overwrote our initial value of 2, and so we actually know that binding is actually working. Let's just do another small test just to ensure that it's actually working. So we're going to have a button here. And we're going to actually data bind to it as well. And so that's the nice thing about WinJS is once you understand that you can just bind to any JavaScript property, then you can apply these bindings not only to our JavaScript controls, but also to all of the intrinsic HTML controls as well. And so what we're going to do here is I'm going to do a data win bind, and we're going to bind to the on-click property of this button. And we're going to bind that to our event handlers that we had in the previous context. And I believe I called it add1. And so I will just give this button a label. And so now if I go back into our script, we have our add1 event handler in our event handler namespace here. And then all I'm going to do here is update that observable proxy that we exported here. And so now if I just call app.context.data.rating, which is our rating control, or rating property, mind you, and if we just do a ++, hopefully when we run the output and I click this button, you can see the value of that rating control going up, which is great. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to end this demo. So this is very the simplistic, basic kind of building blocks of Win.js. And now Edgar is going to take those concepts and he's going to expand those out to the various JavaScript controls that we have in Win.js. And what he did in our Cordova sample to bring a Win.js application cross-platform. So let me switch back to the slides here to give us a little bit more context for everyone. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Edgar, and he's going to talk about all the fun stuff that we've done with the app stock sample.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So next, let's take a look at my screen. And we are going to, this is the application that we're going to be building. It's a sample stocks app. Many of you may be familiar with this UI. We actually released a version of this application as part of the Windows 8 developer preview. And now we are using the code to create a Cordova app now that Win.js is cross-platform. Something that I want to call out is the code is available in GitHub, so you guys can go and dig into the code and open issues or ask questions, and we will be happy to answer. So before we build this app, let's take a look at 4 main controls that are going to be the core of this stocks app. First is the list view. The list view control is one of our most popular controls, and it handles displaying large amounts of data, and it visualizes the elements of the DOM. It supports multiple layouts, grouping, edits. It handles all the animations when the data source changes.
And it handles mouse, keyboard, touch, all of those things too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's one of the main controls. Next, we will be using an app bar control. One interesting part about going cross-platform is that when we were in Windows 8, we used to have these app bar commands using symbols from Seagull UI. And as soon as we went cross-platform, we decided to open source a web font that includes the main and extended set of icons, and it allows different controls such as the app bar, the nav bar, to be able to refer to those icons and work in Android, in iOS, and in platforms that don't necessarily have the Windows Seagull UI font. You can also use it in your own custom content, as this sample shows.
Cool. And that's on our GitHub, right?
Yes.
Awesome.
Cool. So now let's take a look at the code. This is the application running in the simulator. The main control here is the pivot control. Right. The pivot control has different events that allow the application to know whenever the selection change, and then we are able to display different content. It also manages making sure that there is only one view displayed at a time. The pivot control is, let's take a look at the structure of this page.
But this is actually a Cordova application, right?
Exactly.
This isn't a web page. You're actually running Win.js inside of Cordova, targeting iOS.
Exactly. You can imagine that you are able to use the Visual Studio to create a Cordova, right, the multi-device hybrid application, or you can use the command line Cordova create a stocks app, and then in this case we're using iOS, so we created the folder structure using the command line, and then we reference Win.js. Win.js is, you can create your own custom build of Win.js, or you can include the entire Win.js. There is one mail style sheet that reference all the styles and rules for the controls that we'll be using, as well as the reference to a web font that we need for different platforms.
Awesome. So this is just a regular Cordova application using Win.js is just like a regular JavaScript library.
Exactly.
Perfect.
So first, let's take a look at the main structure of the main, kind of like the main element of the index.html. It contains a pivot control. The pivot can be configured to have a title, which we see like right here. Then there are different items. There is a watch list, there is a market section, and there is a news section. We will drill down later into the content of those items. You can pretty much put any content you want. In our scenario, we happen to put list views in the 3 tabs.
Right.
Below, we also see that there is functionality to add to search for different stocks and add it to your watch list. And then towards the bottom, we will see an app bar, which allows you to list all the commands that we will be using in the different tabs, like add, edit, delete. The markets has an option to toggle between list and grid. And we will detect in the pivot control when we are in a given tab and show only the commands that are appropriate for that specific scenario.
Cool.
So
the actual markup that you're showing here is using those exact same concepts that we talked about earlier, where you're using data when control to instantiate your app bar, you're passing it some data through the options. That's great.
Absolutely.
So all of our controls follow that same pattern, the same model. So if you learn it for one, it applies for all of the other ones that we have.
Correct. So let's take a look at at one of the tabs in this pivot control. So let's take a look at a simple one, the news one. You can see that we have a list view. Two of the main, as Paul mentioned, you can specify options for the control, so that when process all is invoked, it uses these settings. Two of the main ones for the list view are the item data source and the item template. The item template indicates what every item is going to look like. So for instance, in this case, we're using a news item template, which is defined here, and is using binding again. And then there is a title, which is this top section, and then there is a description, which is a preview of the article. The item data source, we use in this scenario a binding list, which is a proxy to a list, and it allows you to simply have data in an array and be able to do edits, and it handles sending the notifications to the list view to handle animations, etc.
Right. So we have observable objects, and we can have observable arrays in Min.js as well.
Exactly.
And you could have observable arrays with observable objects inside of that as well.
Correct.
Cool.
That was a simple item template that you can go as complex as you want. In this case here, we can see for the watch list, it's using a watch list item template, which contains a canvas that is used to throw this chart, and then stock details, which is the section that includes all the information about this particular stock. And then we can see that this is just list. Great. So let's go down and let's drill down into default. So one of the main sections that I wanted to show about default is there is an event. You can get a reference to the main pivot control, and then there is an event that allows you to know whenever the user changes the selected tab, and it is the selection change event. So here, every time that we are getting a new selection, we invoke the show method in our three tabs. So we set up the structure of this project as we have one file for every tab. So all the logic for the markets tab is here, for the news tab is here, and for the watch list. So every time there's a selection change is triggered, we look at the selected index, and then we call the appropriate show function.
Right. So this is essentially the main of your application. This is your app shell that's going to coordinate all of the logic between each of your pivot items.
Correct. So every application needs data. That is what makes it exciting. And in this case, we built a small Azure mode service that is going to return JSON, and then so we can, for instance, look at the get stocks info, get stocks history, get news, get market. The way that this works is we are using something called win.js.hrr, which pretty much does an XML HTTP request to a URL, and then it returns a promise with the data, and then we can use this data and we can return it in the promise.
And so that's a pattern most applications are going to follow when they want to hook up to external services.
Correct.
Or hook up to Azure, and we're using mobile services as an example of how to leverage that.
Correct. So this in the screen right now, we have an example of the JSON object that is returned whenever we call get markets, and then we take that JSON object, and then we return it whenever the tab needs the data to provide it to the binding list that is going to be displayed in the list view.
Right.
So if we look at the news tab, we saw earlier that the show method is getting called in the news whenever we switch to the news tab. The first thing we can notice is the markets tab shows an app bar, the watch list shows an app bar with different content. The news one doesn't need an app bar, so in this case we are hiding it. And then the first time that we get to this tab in the pivot control, we are making the call to get news, which, as we saw earlier, is a helper that returns a promise with items. And then we take those items and then we push them to a binding list. As we mentioned earlier, the binding list is a proxy to a list. And we can see that the news, in this case, stocks.news.list, is configured in the news tab in the news list as the item data source, right there. So that is great. Let's look at.
Are you passing the stocks context in through your binding? Is that? I'm sorry, it's through your options. That's right.
Right.
Gotcha.
The list view has an item data source,
right.
and then it's configured the data
Perfect.
source.
Okay.
One other thing that we can also see, another interesting property in the list view, is the on-item invoked. Here we can see that it's calling this event handler, which we see here. So one of the interesting things with Cordova is that you can use plugins to be able to access device capabilities that you wouldn't necessarily be able to call from regular JavaScript.
Right.
And then they do the abstraction for you, and then they handle every platform that it supports. So in this case, whenever an item is invoked, we are calling the URL that that particular item that was clicked, and then we open the system browser, as we can see here. Like, we don't have connection in this emulator. So let's go back to
Cool.
here. And
and you use the Cordova plugin because not all HTML platforms support opening windows on that specific platform.
correct. If we actually look at every time that you do Cordova platform add iOS, they generate an Xcode project for you that also has the same structure. And
Yep.
you can actually see that in the case of iOS, that plugin added the CDB in browser.m and .h files that handle interacting with the native API
Right.
that does the opening of the system browser. The Markets tab is very similar to what we just showed. The only difference here is that there is a little bit of extra logic to configure the app bar. If we detect that the list is being displayed right now as a grid, we allow them to toggle and then display it as a lid. So we have some logic that invokes an app bar API called show-only commands, where you can narrow the set of commands that we had initially in the app bar, all these commands,
Right.
and then display only the ones that are appropriate for this particular scenario. When we go now to the watch list is the most complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's just a lot of more code because it does a lot. It handles retrieving the data, like in this show method. It handles retrieving the data for every chart, the historical data plus the info data, and then it handles edits. We can go ahead and say, oh, I want to edit the list and delete a particular stock. And then it also handles adding a stock. So we use a search box control. And then if we look at the code selected here, we have a suggestions requested event that gets triggered every time that we type something in the text box. So we can go and look at the code of what we're doing in this handler. This handler gets triggered. We look at the query that the user is currently typing. We have a pre-generated list of recommendations, and then we look to see if there is one of these is a substring of the suggestions, and if they are, we go ahead and we add it to the suggestions list of the search box control. Whenever a suggestion is chosen or a query is submitted by clicking on this search icon, we go ahead and call a handler called add stock handler, which we will see defined here. This section is pretty much going and using again our data helper, getting the stock information, these details for this particular stock, getting the history data for that particular stock, using promises to join the retrieval of those two pieces of information.
Because those are two separate network calls that you actually need to coordinate together. So once you have all of that information, you can then update the UI.
Exactly. And then we go ahead and add it to the list, and then we persisted. Here we add it to the list, and then we persisted to local storage just the symbol, the TSLA symbol. That way, the next time that the user launches the application again, they have the customized set of stocks that they added to the application.
And then the list that you're editing, that's the backing binding list to this specific list view in the watch list. And when you did that, we saw all of those, fancy fade-in animation, and it pushed all of the other items down, and that was all done for you.
Correct.
And that's all done using CSS transforms, so it's hardware accelerated, and it works across all of the devices that we could target with WinJS.
Correct. We can also take a look at this. As soon as we added the stock, we call this helper show upper, which show this different set of commands. There is a handler for the edit that allows you to select particular items in the list. In this case, I'm selecting one. Whenever I click delete, we're going to see here that this delete selected handler gets called. We are going and getting the reference to that particular list view, this stock list view.
Yep.
The list view has a property called selection, which allows you to get the indices of the items that are currently selected. So we go in descending order through those indices and delete them from the binding list, which internally is going to trigger notifications that the data change.
Yep.
And then the list view, if we do it right now, when I click delete, the list view is going to go ahead and play the animation and delete the item from the UI.
Yeah. Now I have a question for you. So a lot of the patterns that I'm seeing here is we're getting data from a server, we're wrapping that in some sort of observable collection, and then we're putting that in our UI. And so a lot of other JavaScript libraries that I've seen and I've worked with, and even in our own, we have this concept of a thing called a repeater, where you could build that same list view-like experience, using HTML primitives like unordered lists and things of that nature. What does the list view give you that's different than just stamping that out with your own repeater?
Right. So the main, we always refer you to our main site that displays the list of the set of controls. One of the main assets that the list view, the main things that the list view gives you is the ability of visualization. You can imagine that you have a list of or a data source that has 20,000 items, and then we obviously don't want to display have all those 20,000 items in the DOM.
Right. If I used a repeater, I would have 20,000 items actually in the DOM if I was to do that.
Exactly. So one of the main things in the list view, which makes it makes it more complex, but at the same time more powerful, is the fact that it handles visualizing the data for you. So in this case, even if we look at this scenario, we actually have 8 times 20, 116 items in this list. When we start scrolling, it looks like we actually have them all of them in the DOM, but we actually don't. We actually only we calculate how many items fit in the viewport, and then we have extra pages, and we ensure that the panning performance is good. In addition to that, the list view also handles keyboarding for you. We want to make sure that all these controls are really high polished and they work well with touch, with keyboard, with mouse. There are other features in the list view, such as reordering content, and one of the main ones, you can do groups you can have groups in your list. There are the option of creating multiple different layouts. In this stock sample, we were actually using list layouts and grid layout in all the scenarios, but you can actually even have the option to create a custom layout, and then the list view also handles animations for you whenever you change the binding list that is associated. When you use the repeater, you will see that it's stamping the content many times, but it doesn't necessarily give you visualization for your scenario.
Right, and so in your case, you thought to yourself, well, the end user could have as many, stock favorites if they wanted to, and so you preferred the open-ended virtual UI virtualized list as opposed to stamping out, and you wanted things like animations, and so you were able to just drop that in, use our models, and connect that up to some data, and we kind of the system or the framework took care of the rest for you. Cool.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Let's switch to the slides for a second.
Sure.
And let's go to
learn more. Awesome.
Yes.
So I think that concludes the demo. I mean, we could talk, endlessly about the type of JavaScript controls that we have available to you, but we actually would like to encourage you to actually participate with us.
Right.
And so our call to action is really take a look at Win.js, go to our GitHub, file pull requests, issues you may find. If you're building a Cordova app, let us know. Let us know the platforms that you're targeting. We have a good browser matrix that we do our full-on. We do unit testing on every check-in to GitHub. But there might be some platforms that we haven't actually gotten to yet that Win.js might actually be running on. We just haven't had the time to test it yet.
Right.
But you may be writing your Cordova application targeting that specific mobile platform.
Right. We encourage you to go to our GitHub page. Again, Win.js is now open source. It's in GitHub. It is cross-platform. We're constantly creating many new different features. There are many exciting features coming in the future. Very recently, we added a content dialog control. If you have been tracking our commits, there was a split view control that went in the past week. So we really encourage you to use our GitHub page, file issues, ask questions, visit our Try Build Win.js site where you can have a playground and see in action how all the controls work. And again, ask us questions. We're really happy to always triage every issue and answer questions. We also have in the references, in the slides, we also have link to our status page. Every time that we do a commit in GitHub, we actually automated the process of running all our unit tests in
Sauce Labs.
In Sauce Labs, which is an open source solution. So it's very exciting. Every commit, we ran all our unit tests for every component in IE 10, IE 11, Safari, Firefox, iOS, Chrome.
Yeah.
So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and the one last thing that we'd like to show you is that since Edgar's been doing everything in Cordova, and since we're actually just running an HTML5 JavaScript application, you can take that exact same code and deploy it to a website. And so here we actually have the Stocks app running full in a web browser, and this works across IE, Firefox, in Safari on Mac. And so this is really kind of the first look at doing HTML5 development, deploying it to web properties, deploying it to mobile devices using Apache Cordova. And we think this is really exciting. We're making lots of progress. And we would love to have you guys contribute, talk to us on Twitter, Stack Overflow, all of the regular spots for developer questions. And so with that, we're going to wrap up this module. And we hope that you stay tuned for the next module. We're going to talk a little bit about more cross-platform development. Some WebGL is on the way. And so we'd just like to, on behalf of the entire Win.js team, we'd like to thank you and take Win.js for a try. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back, guys. Happy to be there.
Yeah, the last part of the day, an introduction to WebGL, 3D, and Babylon.js with
Sure.
David. So let's go. I'm still Eric, you know.
Yeah, and I'm still David. For those who didn't know me, I'm program manager for Microsoft DX, Developer Experience, and I'm more focused around Open Web Standard and IE. But today, and for this specific session, I'm here because I am the author, the father of...
The father, yeah.
Father, yeah, that's exactly the term. It's my baby. Yeah. And of a free open source framework called Babylon.js that I will present soon.
Okay, so the agenda for this last session is 1, using 3D accelerated graphics with HTML5 and of course WebGL.
Yes.
Using Babylon to get right on WebGL complexity.
Yep.
And performance consideration, because it's something really important.
Yeah, it's about cross-platform. So we have to deal with different quality of hardware from low end to high end. So we will have to discuss a bit at the end. It will be perhaps a little bit complex, but we have to discuss that.
Yeah, but it's still a very interesting subject to know.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so 3D accelerated graphics with HTML5 and WebGL across devices, that make a lot of sense to invite you and to finish the day with that.
Thank you.
Cross-platform, it's about HTML5 all the day. And yes, HTML5 is live today. Okay, so what is WebGL?
Yeah, it's a good question. What's WebGL?
Yes, a good question. So it's a JavaScript API.
Yes.
So that makes sense to have it today. It's based on OpenGL
Yes.
Embedded System 2.0.
Yes.
It's standardized by Cron's Group, and it works perfectly well in Cordova, as I demonstrated this morning.
Yeah, you did a blog about that using Babylon.js into a Cordova application that works pretty well.
Oh yeah, that was pretty well on Windows Phone, on Android, on the Firefox OS I just tested last week, and of course iOS.
Yeah, that's what, since iOS 8, WebGL is now almost on all modern, let's say, small devices.
Yeah. So that makes sense to have this discussion about WebGL now. Using WebGL directly, it's possible, of course, everything is possible, but you have to handle everything except the rendering. So you have to manage a render loop, handle the texture and all the resource management, create the geometry, topology, and of course, create shader code. And sometimes shader code is not so easy. Yeah?
Because when we want to deal with this kind of low-level API, you have to be good at math, you have to be good at GLSL, which is the language used by the shaders.
Yeah.
You have to perfectly understand how the GPU and the CPU are communicating, how the memory bandwidth is used, and that's not easy. It's really, really low level.
Yeah.
It's like wanting to create your own car, but just based on some trash of metal. You have a bit of metal, you have a bit of gas, and you have to create your car.
Yeah, not so easy.
Yeah, that's not easy.
Yeah. That's why perhaps we can see a demo about that.
I think I can show you how WebGL is working if you want. Okay, so I prepared for you guys a small project that will be available, obviously, with this course at the end. It's something I try to do the simplest WebGL code possible.
Something like a box.
Yeah, not even a box. I just tried with a triangle.
Okay. So
basically, what we need from the point of view of HTML5 is just a canvas.
Yep.
WebGL is rendered into a canvas, like we did with, for instance, if you are dealing with 2D. WebGL is rendered into a canvas. I also use a specific JavaScript library called GL Matrix. This library will get me right off using all the math implied into computing matrices and etc.
Okay.
This is not what I want to show you today, but it's an important point. You have to deal with math if you want to work with WebGL.
Matricial.
Matricial computation with vector 3 and things like that. Yeah. That's not easy, and it could be far.
Far from you, man.
Yeah. The very first step we have to deal with is pretty simple. You just have to get the canvas itself, define the rendering size you want, and you get a new context. Instead of getting a 2D context, this time you will get what we call the WebGL context. Here, it's experimental. You can ask for experimental. It's like prefixes when you are working with CSS. It's a way the browser vendor used to tell you that it's not finished, it's not final version of WebGL.
Okay.
So I get a context, I'm calling it GL here. The second step, because we have to deal with two different processors here, this code, the JavaScript, will be executed on the CPU.
Yep. Yes.
But WebGL is about sending order to GPU. So we have to send code, we have to compile something for the GPU. And if we go back to my page here, I'm using a little trick. I have two scripts here, but these scripts into my web page are not about JavaScript, it's what we call GLSL.
Okay.
Graphic Library Shader Language. The very first one is
the main
vertex shader, and the second one is pixel shader. I don't want to go too deep into this specific stuff. If you want guys to have some MVA course about really how 3D is working on the web, just use the chat for that, and we can think about creating a specific MVA course for you. Here, we can just imagine that this specific code will be, it's like C for the GPU, will be compiled in a way and sent to the GPU. So I just write my code here because I need space to write my code. So I have here a small function that will get this code from the DOM. Pretty simple. I just go through a specific element, and at the end, I'm using a specific function of GL, which is create shader. Please create a shader for me. This means compile this specific code into some assembly for the GPU.
At this time, it's dynamic compiling.
It's dynamic, absolutely. It's about dynamic compilation, exactly. Okay. Then once I get my shader source, I can compile it, and if everything is okay, I won't have an error. Okay, this specific line is more for me in order to get some feedback. Oh, your shader is not working because you forgot something. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Then I can get two shaders, the pixel shader and the vertex shader, and I have to link them, like in C. I will link my code to generate the final bytecode used by the GPU itself. So it's about attaching shader and at the end linking program, and this program is the code that will be executed by the GPU to render my scene.
Okay, the name of the function here is really clear. It's linking.
It's about linking. Yeah. We have OBJ like in C or C++, and I will link this code into the final output.
Okay.
Okay, and I say to WebGL, please use this specific program. Then I have to define my geometry. So it's about creating what we call attribute, vertex attribute. And I'm saying that this specific object will have position, color, and normal. I don't want to spend too many time in this specific stuff. It's really...
Just a question. You sure it's only for a triangle, lad?
Yeah, for now we are just dealing about a triangle. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Then I also have to define specific variable called uniform. If you are looking at my code here, I have two uniform defined. A uniform is a variable defined by the CPU and used by the GPU. Okay.
Okay.
I want to make my triangle rotating. That's why I need some specific matrices, and that's not simple. Once everything is defined, I have to fill my geometry vertex buffer and index buffer with some data. So here are the indices I want to send. So X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. So I have 3 points. Yeah.
One triangle.
This point will have first coordinate, second coordinate, third coordinate. First color, the color of the first point, the color of the second point, the color of the third point, and normals. Normals, it's something we need for light computation. I don't need specifically that here right now, but it's just to show you. So right now, somewhere in the GPU memory, I have what we call a buffer, and this buffer was filled with some data, okay? And then I have the render loop. The render loop will be executed as fast as possible. I clear the screen. I define some funky matrix here. Don't want to get into that right now. I define where are my vertex, and then I call one order. Please draw me a triangle.
Wow.
Wow. And if I execute that,
that's wrong.
That works. I have a triangle. So obviously, if you want to create a game, it will be a bit touchy.
Yes, that's the beginning.
Yes, that's why I can go back to the slide.
Yeah.
will back.
Oh, you have okay,
Yeah.
on your screen. On
Yeah.
Eric's screen.
And that's why, thanks, David, we have Babylon.
Yes, we need something easier.
Yeah, sure. So, what is Babylon?
Babylon is like the car. You want the car. You
Yeah.
want to drive a car. You don't want to build your car.
Okay, so it's a 40,000 plus line of code.
Yeah, it's a big bunch of code. Right now, when you want to use a minified version of the library, it's around 500K, which is okay because
Yeah.
it's not the size really doesn't matter here because when you want to deal with scene, a scene can be more than 50 megabytes, so it's not the size of the engine itself.
Okay, so for this quantity of code produced in something like 2 years, less than 2 years.
Less than 2 years. Yeah, I think the engine is like 1 year and 2 months old. Or
Okay,
things like
I
that.
think it's a huge team working on it.
No, we are almost.
Yes.
I'm the main developer, to be honest with you. I'm working with David Rousset from France,
Yep.
who helps me on some specific stuff, and obviously with Michel Rousseau, also from France. As you perhaps you
Yeah.
didn't notice that, but we are French. And Michel Rousseau is the designer working with us to create the scene. I will show you right after because when we work with 3D, it's not just about 3D shapes. It's also about creating really appealing scenes, and that's why we need a designer, and that's important.
Yeah.
The site is is getting a lot of traction right now.
Yeah.
People like Farmers Insurance, Ubisoft with Assassin's Creed are using right now this library to create games on the web.
Yeah, and some team at Microsoft too. no?
Yes, some internal team that I cannot share right now.
Okay.
But,
Sorry on
are
that.
also using Babylon.js for some specific projects.
Yeah, cool, really cool. So Babylon is here and it's really cool. And to use Babylon, it's pretty simple.
Yes.
I use that a lot now, and but
To use as a foundation, I can
Yeah,
say it for
sorry.
Babylon.js, we wanted two things: simplicity and performance. I want things to be simple. I want a web developer to be able to use Babylon.js without having to deal with anything else than just what you want to create.
Yeah.
You want to create a game which is about, I don't know, birds against pigs, for instance. You don't have to deal about 3D.
And-
I just
and
want
shadows.
Yeah, you just have to focus on your game, and that's it.
Yeah. So to start, just use the Babylon.js source script. It's only one file.
Only one file. You just have to reference it, and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
And then you will have to create just one specific object, the engine. The engine is your best friend. The engine is, I can say that, is the guy that will deal with WebGL for you.
Yeah.
It's the guy that will compile the shaders and also try to optimize stuff for you. You will just have to ask him, please draw me my scene, and the engine will work for you.
Okay, just a question before start some demos or something. Did you wrote the code in JavaScript or TypeScript?
That's a good question. The very first version of Babylon.js that we started 1 year and 2 months ago was created with pure plain JavaScript. At that time, TypeScript was not enough ready to be used. But we changed our mind some months ago, I think it's 4 months ago, and we backport everything from JavaScript to TypeScript. So right now, all the engine is built using TypeScript.
Script.
Obviously, at the end, the output is always Babylon.js. It's a
Yes.
JavaScript file.
Yeah.
But
Readable
all-
JavaScript.
Yes,
Yeah.
but all the development team is working on using TypeScript.
And what are the benefit for you?
The very first benefit was we found so many bugs. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
We can use using a strongly typed environment is extremely powerful because we can find bugs like calling a function instead of a member or things like that. That's pretty easy with TypeScript. TypeScript is also a great tool to work together because you can easily integrate a code done by another people.
Yeah.
The compilation, the static compilation, will help you find out if there is an issue or not. And at the end, because it's pure JavaScript that it's split out, that's okay.
Perfect. So now we have an engine on Babylon, and if we look at the slide, the next one.
Yeah, and if you want to work with that, you will have what we call a scene graph. So something less abstract than buffers or stuff that I present before, I mentioned before with WebGL. You will have to work with scene, camera, light, sphere. That's easy to understand.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know Babylon.js, here you can understand that there will be a camera with a light and a sphere somewhere.
Exactly.
And the render loop itself will be handled for you. So engine.renderLoop will try to call your code as fast as possible.
Okay.
You don't have to.
You don't
think
cap
about
it. You don't limit the.
No,
the
it will be
FPS.
handled for you by Babylon.js freely.
Okay. Okay. So let's continue.
Yeah.
In terms of features, I saw many features.
Yeah,
in Babylon. It's
I
pretty
spend
amazing.
all my time working with Babylon.js. All my spare time is dedicating to working with Babylon.js. So obviously we have a lot of features from collision engine to physics engine, a lot
Yeah.
of stuff like support for Oculus, WebVR, shadows, whatever. We try to give you a tool that allows you to create what you want without having to think about, oh, I need this specific stuff, and it will be. It's not available into the engine. Okay, so yeah, we try to provide you everything required. Okay.
Lot of features, amazing features, and some main primitives.
Yeah, out of the box, you will be able to have some specific basic primitives like the obvious
Plain
one.
line, yeah.
Yeah, box, sphere, torus, cylinder, the knot. I love the knot. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful one. Perhaps I can show you a small demo if you
I
want.
think it's time to a
Okay.
demo. Yes.
So let me open a specific website I have here, ready for you guys. And I have the very first demo. So from scratch, if I want to use Babylon.js, the only thing I have to do is referencing.
Babylon.
That's it. No need for other dependency. You just need that.
You provide a debug version.
Yes,
to
there is two versions. There is the minify version for
production.
production, absolutely, and obviously when you want to develop, you just have to say, I want the max version, which contain all the debug information.
Okay.
Okay. Then the only things I need, as before, because we are dealing at the end of the day with WebGL, we need a canvas where everything will be rendered. I have some style here. The goal of this style is just to have the canvas full screen. That's it.
Okay. Okay.
Then, first step, I get my canvas, I create my engine, working on this specific canvas. You can have as many engines as you want, as long as each engine has a canvas. The true parameter here define I want anti-aliasing. It will be done for you freely. And how things are working, I create my scene. I can create a camera. We have tons of different cameras. This one is about an arc rotate camera. The specific camera will work around a center and will allow you to rotate around the center. Okay, that's pretty interesting when you want to present a specific object. So the user will be able to rotate around without having to deal with translation or rotation or whatever. It will be handled for you. Okay. Then the camera will handle for you all input, touch, keyboard, mouse. That will be handled for you, no problem. I create then a light. We have 4 different types of light. This one is something we can compare to an ambient light. When you're outside, there is light everywhere. So this is a kind of what hemispheric light can produce for you.
Okay.
Then the well-known Crit sphere. Here, I don't know why I have box, but let's call it box then. It will be far simple. So I create a box. This box will have a material. So the material is something I will go back after, is related to shaders. You don't have to mess with shader. Everything here will be done for you just by this standard material. A shader will be compiled for you.
Perhaps you can see on material dots the list of the different.
This object has a lot of features for you. You can support ambient, backface culling, diffuse color, emissive color. We have a bunch of them here, specular color, whatever. Everything that you should find into your tools like 3ds Max or Blender or Maya should be there.
Yeah, amazing, pretty amazing.
So let's see the result.
Okay.
Wow!
Amazing
box,
one.
yes. So I'm rotating around with my mouse, but obviously because my screen supports touch, I can also rotate around and I can even zoom, pitch and zoom. You don't have to do nothing about that. Everything was done for you by just this specific line, attach control. We try to keep things simple. If a specific feature requires more than one line, then perhaps it's a fail for us. Okay? We try to do that in a simple way possible. Another example here, same structure, and this time I want to show you, so you can create a box, you can create a sphere, a plane, cylinders, torus knot, lines between points.
Okay.
Then you can play with position, for instance, if you want to move your object around. And that's pretty much it. Let me show you the result.
Okay, in something like 20 line of codes,
Yeah, and you have
comparing to the WebGL
Yeah.
first demo.
here we have a lot of triangle, for instance, for the torus knot, which is here, and you can see that the
What is the material you use for
by default there is a white material.
Okay.
So here I didn't define the material, so Babylon.js will create one for you. As you can see, we have this kind of lightning, what we call specular, with the shadow inside it.
Okay.
It's free. It's already computed for you by default.
that I love in Babylon, that the by default argument.
Yeah,
if you forgot something, you obtain a result,
Yeah.
a concrete result. And say, oh yes, I forgot the color or I forgot something.
Most of the time, I try
Yeah.
to add missing part instead of giving you an error.
Yeah.
I prefer adding something for you, and if you want to control that, then you have obviously to go inside your code and change that.
But it's less frustrating that
Oh,
nothing
yeah.
appears in the screen, you know.
By far. Another example here. This time I have a point light. A point light is a point, so the light
It's
is
like a spot.
It's like a sun.
Sun. Okay.
The sun, everywhere the light will be emitted from a specific point in space. Okay.
Okay.
So you can move it around, and it can control easily the position of the light, by the way.
Okay. And the shadow.
And the shadow implied by this light is also easily understandable this way.
Okay.
So this time I also create my camera. I create 6 spheres, okay, different spheres. I move them at different position.
Yeah.
I also add a plane, and this time I will play with what we call the standard material, and I want to show you different options. The very first material will be applied to sphere 1, and this time I just want a wireframe. Okay, so it won't be a plain object, it will be an object with just line. The second material is just regular diffuse color, but with transparency this time. I can control the alpha. The third one is just not a plain color, but this time a texture. I want to use this specific texture, MISC here. Okay. I will use this texture and apply it on my sphere. Then I can also play with the position and the scaling and the offset of the texture. So this time I will move my texture a bit on the object. I can also use what we call alpha texture. So this time 3.png. Here it's transparent, okay,
Yes,
around the leaves. So this texture will be applied on a sphere. And finally, I can also play with the same alpha texture, but this time I want also to disable the fact that Babylon.js will remove for you the back face. Most of the time, you don't need to render the back face.
Yeah.
But when you apply transparent material on an object, you need to go and to see through your object.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Then I have a plane, a texture for my plane, and this time I will scale a specific texture, meaning it will be repeated a certain amount of time. Okay. And the result of these little things, as you can see, I have my very first one, the wireframe.
Yeah.
The second one is transparent with red color. Same object, but this time I moved a bit my texture on the second one.
Yeah.
Then I have my alpha texture here. But as you can see, we can see through. And because the backface coding is enabled, there is no backface.
Yes.
And the latest one is just the same story, but this time we can see the backface because I removed this option.
Okay. Okay.
You can play with the material easily. I want also to show you some specific fun things. It's not just about shaders and objects, it's also about special effects. For instance, here, I create a box, and this box will be alongside a plane, and I create a new object, a particle system.
I really love particle
me
systems.
too. We can simulate so many things with particle
Yeah.
system, like smokes, fires, and things like
Voids.
waters.
Voids.
Voids, absolutely. And I just have to specify, for instance, the texture used by the particle system. Who is the emitter?
Yep.
Contain object, which is here. It's
The
a box.
emitter.
Okay, will be the emitter. And I define the size of the emission box, the color of the particles, the size of the particle, the lifetime of the particle. We have a lot of options available for you. The gravity applied, the direction when they start, the rotation of the particles, etc., etc. We just have to call start.
And the magic happens.
And the magic happens. Let's see that.
Okay.
That's it.
That's a fontaine.
Yeah.
Particle fontaine. Okay. Pretty cool.
As you can see, the color of the particle is between yellow and red because I defined two colors, and they are rendered all around the emitter, which is the box. And the box is rotating, as you can see that the particles are following the box itself.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want with particles. That's pretty powerful. I also want to show you something different. Because here is more about web developers. And to be honest with you, if you want to create a game, you also have to work with 3D assets tools like 3ds Max or Blender. We decided with Babylon.js to support Blender 3D and 3ds Max in a really convenient way. I asked Michel Rousseau, my friend, to create for me a complete 3ds Max scene. This engine is a real engine and is fully animated into 3ds Max.
Wow. Lot of job.
Yeah, but this guy is a magician. I don't know how he can do that, but
he don't sleep, in fact.
I don't know. I think it's about talent. I wanted to allow all 3ds Max users to be able to work this way. They create all their assets, all their scene into their favorite tool. And at the end, they can they can export a specific scene, and this scene can be easily loaded into Babylon.js.
So you wrote an importer for
Exactly. There is an exporter right there. You just have to say, hey, I want to put this object on my desktop. That's perfect. Let's call it engine. I want to copy the texture alongside the object itself. The .babylon format is just pure JSON.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy to use. And I just have to click export and run. And I have some kind of log here if I want to understand what's happening. And at the end, 3ds Max will call for me my favorite browser. Obviously, it's IE here. Yeah. And look at that. That perfectly running engine with shadows, animation, was exported directly from 3ds Max. So if you want to understand how this kind of engine is working,
there are explosions.
Yeah, there are explosions that move the pistons here and rotate that stuff, and that's cool.
The chain.
And it's pure WebGL code. Obviously, it's easy to use right now because you can create your scene with 3ds Max or Blender 3D and just play with it into your own JavaScript code.
Okay.
If you want to play with this kind of stuff, no, that's not the right one. Sorry about that. I'm looking for the right object. Yeah, this one. You still have to create your canvas, create your scene, your engine, create your scene, and we have a tool called babylon.SceneLoader.
Yep.
And we have two different ways. You can import mesh from a specific .babylon file into existing scene.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see the result.
Okay.
Okay, I imported this skull into my scene.
For the Halloween period?
Yeah, that's exactly for that. And I can zoom in. It's me. I use Kinect to scan I have no noise, no noise as you can see. Or you can obviously load a complete scene. So for instance, I have a folder here.
With scenes?
With a scene inside. Let me show you the content. I have a lot of textures, okay? And I have this split.babylon file. But I have to say something. We can use the pure JSON version of the Babylon format, but we can also use what we call the incremental version. In this case, all the scene won't be loaded at once, but we will load as soon as an object will be available to be rendered, we will load the specific object. That's pretty interesting because if you have a huge scene, you don't want to load everything in
wait
a long time. You want to load where you are and then load while you are wandering around.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So in this case, if I go back to my code here, I just use the load. I specify the folder where is the content. Here is the incremental.babylon object. And when everything is ready, I just have to say, okay, when the new scene is ready, execute when ready, just launch the render loop. That's it. All the code is here.
Yeah.
And with this code and nothing more, we just be able to do that. So as you can see, this is interesting. It's not a bug, absolutely. It's a feature of Babylon.js. We can save data locally into your indexed.db storage. So next time you will load this in, instead of loading everything from the web, we can use the local indexed.db. So let's say yes, obviously.
Okay.
Oh, I recognize this.
Yeah, this is my favorite one. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can wander around. The scene was loaded. There is collision. I can go through the wall. I can go upstairs if I want. That's working well. And it's like 10 lines of code. I just have to load the scene created by Michel Rousseau from 3ds Max. That's pretty simple, right? Pretty
Oh,
convenient.
yeah. As you said.
So let's go back to
That's good.
slide and
Yep. Let's back to the slide. We cover of our standard materials. I think we can go forward. Materials. Interesting subject, the inputs. So,
we have a lot of different inputs.
yes.
The way we are thinking about that is that the camera is the way from the user. It's the user into the scene. The camera is the user. So we wanted to allow the web developer to control the camera in as much possible way.
Of inputs. Yeah.
So for instance, if you want to control the camera with touch, then we have a camera called touch camera.
Yes.
If you want to control the camera with device orientation, like you can do on your phone by moving your phone, then it's device orientation camera. If you want to use virtual joystick, I will show you a demonstration of that.
This morning,
Yeah, and then you just have to use a virtual joystick camera. If you want to use anaglyph, you know, the different color on your glasses, and
Yeah.
you use.
I never tested that. I will tonight.
Pretty funny. It's the cheapest way to get 3D. I think.
Yeah.
But by the way, I don't have my cardboard here, but we also have a cardboard camera.
Yeah,
called,
I demonstrated that this morning too.
that's perfect. We support Oculus, we support WebVR in Chrome and Firefox, we support Gamepad. All things are working. Let me show you.
Okay.
It's extremely straightforward as well. Let's take this specific sample. So as before, I load my Esprit scene, the museum. And this time I want to use Oculus camera.
Right.
Just this line of code. When load is okay, it will call this anonymous function. This anonymous function allows me to create a new Oculus camera. I'm using the active camera of the scene just to get the position of the user. And this camera will be attached, and I say to my scene, okay, use this active camera. That's it, nothing more. And if I'm going to my web browser, look at that. I don't have my Oculus with me, obviously. I can use the mouse to simulate that. But it's easy to understand that if I have an Oculus on my head, it will work. And obviously, because it's already connected, when I move my head, it will send device orientation API to AI, for instance, here, and I can control where I'm looking. That's interesting.
And how do you advance, go forward?
We have two different Oculus camera. The very first one is Oculus camera itself, which I'm using right now, and I can use my keyboard.
Okay.
Or we also have the gamepad Oculus camera.
Okay.
So you can use the gamepad while you have the Oculus on your head.
Okay.
If you want to use different camera, this is always the same story. This time I'm using virtual joystick that you showcased this morning, or I can use the gamepad camera if I want. That's pretty simple. We just have to do that.
Yeah.
A latest point I want to mention with you guys. If you want to learn more about Babylon.js, you can obviously go to babylonjs.com site, and here you can find a try it button. This will drive you to what we call the playground. The playground is a place where you can experiment and learn Babylon.js with just your browser. You don't need anything else, just the browser itself. So we have different basic scene here. You can see this one, for instance. I can play with this scene. For instance, I can see here that my sphere is too much defined. I can change the sphere here. And I want to change, for instance, the number of segments and use 32. Just hit run. And as you can see, the sphere is
more polished.
Is more, smooth. The funny and interesting thing is that we add IntelliSense into this specific playground. Okay. So if you want to learn, the best way is to type. For instance, what can I do with my sphere? Sphere, dot, and automatically a complete IntelliSense system will appear. And for instance, I can say, oh, that's interesting. Perhaps I can play with position. Yes, there is a position which is babylon.vector3 here. Let's use it. Dot, I have a lot of operation available on the position itself, and I can see that I have X, Y, Z. So I can say X is equal to 5, for instance, and I can run that again. And that's pretty interesting because, because I still touch the sphere position right after. That's interesting.
Okay.
Let's move that here, just to be sure.
After, yeah.
Okay, and we can see the sphere moved.
Yeah.
Interesting thing, you're pretty happy with that. You're so proud of what you did. You can save it, and I will generate for you here a unique URL so you can share that with your friend.
Look.
Look what I did.
Yeah.
Isn't that excellent? And if you want to use this specific code into your own application, you can get a zip of everything required. So I generate a zip, and if you open it, you have all the code available. So you can just copy-paste that into your application. Everything is already configured for you.
In a Cordova application, for example?
For instance, you just have to drag and drop that into a Cordova application.
Yeah. Okay. We plan to have another demo about universal apps.
Yes.
I think it's time.
And it's a good time to do that. Universal app is like you mentioned with Cordova. It's just drag and drop. Let me show you that. I have here my object, already prepared Visual Studio project. So it's a basic universal app, nothing special. I just drag and drop into the shared folder the SPLit demo we just seen, okay, Babylon.js, and obviously always my same code I mentioned before with the load. I attach my camera, and that's it. If I execute that, it will compile for me a Windows 8.1 and a Windows Phone 8.1, and that works perfectly well. Thanks to JavaScript support into a universal app, I can play with that, and then if I have some settings here, I can add whatever I want. I can change the control, for instance, by controlling that perhaps with a gamepad or with touch if I want to control that with touch. It's a full JavaScript application, but it's also a full Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8.1. It works exactly the same way with Cordova. You just have to drag and drop.
Yes.
That's it. It's pure JavaScript, nothing else, nothing special, no dependencies.
Okay, it's pretty amazing, and the performance are here. Definitely, the performance are here. We are in the browser. We are not native C++.
Yep.
We are in the browser with JavaScript, and you see the performance. So the last section of this talk, it's about performance consideration, because you did an amazing work based on pretty simple ideas, but brilliant one.
Thank you.
Okay, so state caching, garbage collector, smart shaders.
Yes, we have a lot of performance stuff into Babylon.js, to be honest with you. But mainly, we did 3 big things. And I want to share that with you guys just to let you understand how things are going under the hood. And this may explain why, for instance, if you have a Windows Phone, you can go to babylonjs.com. You can try to open the SPLit scene, and it will work. It will work on your phone.
Yep.
Because we did so many stuff around optimization. So let me explain you what we did. First of all, no, I'm not on the right side. Yeah. First of all, here is the code.
Yeah, on the slide.
On the slide, yeah.
Yep.
Here is the code we use to multiply 2 matrices.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a big bunch of code.
Yeah.
There is no loop. I try to be the more optimal possible. And there is nothing special to optimize. We need to do all this operation.
Yep.
But the main problem was the very first line. If you look at the code, you will see that the first line is about creating a matrix.
Yep.
Each time I multiply a matrix A by a matrix B, I have to create a matrix C that will hold the result.
Yeah.
Sure.
So you create an amazing number of metrics.
Absolutely. If you are speaking, for instance, about SPLit demonstration we just seen, because of the collision engine, because of all the operation we have to move object around, it's around 6,000 matrices multiplication per frame, and we have to do that 60 times per second.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of matrix multiplication. That means that's a lot of matrix instantiation.
Yep.
And by just changing a little bit what we are doing with this specific one, so this time it's not about creating a new matrix each time, but changing a bit the API. That's less easy to read, I have to admit, because if you want to multiply A by B, you have to provide C.
Yeah, the result.
But in this case, you create C just 1 time per frame, for instance, and all the matrix operation we have to do will return the result into C. So you don't have to instantiate a matrix each time. And a matrix is 16 floats, which is big.
Yes.
Yeah. What we did also, so we did that for all math operation we have. Then we also create a different array. The array in JavaScript, there is
friendly array.
Yeah, we call it the GC friendly array, garbage collector friendly array. This array is a simple array where we control the length. We control the length of the array. Meaning, if you want to reset your array, before I have to create a new array.
Yep.
There is no other option.
In JavaScript, yeah.
So each time I need an array, I have to create a new one, fill it, and just throw it away and let the garbage collector work with that. Right now, I can reuse my array, my memory, and I just have to say length is equal to 0. I control that.
Okay.
And I can reuse my memory. It's just about reusing memory. With all this operation, we obtain such good result because mostly on low-end devices, the performance was drawn by the garbage collector trying to work simultaneously with the main JavaScript itself. So if you see the slide here, you can see that before, most of the time, scripting and garbage collectors are working almost together. So if you just have one processor and one thread, that's not good.
That's a conflict. Yeah.
After that, because there is no more instantiation, it's just pure, all the power was available for the JavaScript itself.
Okay. No more for the garbage collector.
Yep.
Okay.
Then state caching is another issue we add. WebGL is a state machine, so each time you want to change something, it's extremely expensive because the state machine has just one state.
Okay.
So if you want to change something, you have to finish what you are working on, wait for the end of what you are working on, change the state, and run the next step. Rendering a new frame or whatever. So let's imagine you have two objects. The first one is transparent, the second one is not transparent. If you want to do that, you have to set WebGL to transparent mode in a way, render the first object, then change the state to not transparent, and render the second object. That's okay because you just have two objects. Let's imagine right now you have 10,000 objects. Some are transparent, some are not. We need to control state changing because it's so expensive. So we have a lot of stuff into Babylon.js about catching the state. So we try to gather objects between which share the same states, for instance, and we change the state only when required, not just when we think it should be available. Okay? And finally, last but not least, we also work on a
smart shader.
Smart shader. The smart shader is inside the standard material we just seen before. The smart shader is a tool we build, and I'm writing a chapter of a book about this specific technology. This book will be available through some guys at Kronos Group. The book will be called WebGL Insight, and I'm talking about this specific technology we developed for Babylon.js. In a way, it's a way to remove all the loop and all the condition into your shaders. GPU are extremely powerful to render a lot of stuff. They are extremely powerful to use single instruction, multiple data. That's perfect for that. They hate conditions because conditions can break the pipeline. Because
it's a performance killer.
Yeah, it's a performance killer. There is no really branchment condition we have like in CPU. So each time there is an if or each time there is a loop, it could be really painful for the GPU to handle that. And most of the time, the if can break the pipeline, the current pipeline. So the GPU has to render everything, wait, and then test your value and do everything else. So what we did with the smart shader, we just think about using the dynamic compilation of shader to generate only what you need. For instance, you want just diffuse color and no emissive. Instead of having a shader with if diffuse color, then do something, if emissive, then do something, we remove physically from the shader itself the code not required. So with the smart shader technology, there is no if into our shaders. So it's far powerful, mainly obviously same story on low-end devices.
Pretty good stuff.
Yeah,
amazing.
That's not easy to explain. I'm sorry about that.
Sure.
But
I think the people watching us understand the main gesture about the performance, and you can test by yourself the performance of Babylon with the website you describe. So Yeah.
And if you're really interested into that, just ping me on my Twitter @DeltaCoach, and I would love to share that with you guys.
So the main purpose here is to minimize the number of active objects, like we saw
Yes.
in the slide, and maximize the GPU work. That makes sense.
That's the point. The CPU is the limitation most of the time, and we need to try to move the amount of work from the CPU to the GPU, right?
Yeah.
And we do that by trying, for instance, if we are thinking about particles, the very first version was just purely CPU. We moved a lot of things to the GPU. We try to reduce the number of active objects the scene render. So for instance, we're using Octree, clipping, culling, all the current state technology we can have.
Okay.
Pretty much it.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things. That's really the best way for you guys. Perhaps the best call to action for you is just go to babylonjs.com. That's it's free. It's based on Apache 2.
Yep. It's on open
Use
source.
it, fork it, try to do what you want to do. Ping me if you need something. We have a pretty decent forum with a lot of people that can answer a question.
Yep.
It's up to you.
Yeah. That concludes this part of the session, and in fact, it was the last session of the day. So we have here a little wrap up with you. So today was an intensive day, and we learned a lot of things. I hope you learned a lot of things from the web to the app. We start with Olivier this morning. After you have a talk with Olivier about what is what.
What is what? Absolutely.
And the feeling of this solution and what you can do with that. We have also a demonstration with one of the PM of the group who built the multi-device hybrid app extension for Visual Studio. A pretty good integration of Cordova in Visual Studio. I love it very much. We have an interesting chat, I think, about the JavaScript compatibility, but the world is not pink, as we said in France. So sometimes we have some issue, and we try to resolve here with the shim a lot of issue of the security model we have. We have a nice talk with the guy from WinJS. Look twice about WinJS. It's a very interesting framework. It's not only Windows. It's very, very cross-platform.
Yep.
And we have some tests about amazing links contain thousands of items, and the performance is definitely here. Pretty good job. And we finish, last but not least, about Web3D, because Web3D it's the new web for us.
Oh yeah, that's the next frontier.
Exactly. And now we have the devices, we have the performance in our devices permit us to use the 3D. So let's go for it. Last, join the MVA community. It's a free online learning tools for IT pro today for developers. More than 2 million registered users. And today, with this code, CrossPlat Dev VS, you have a voucher to earn 50 MVA points. So let's go for that.
Don't forget the chat, and there is a poll right now. It will be quickly. There will be quickly a poll. Sorry about that. That's the end of the day.
It's important for us to understand what is missing in this kind of day, how we can improve ourselves.
Sure.
What do you want to see more in detail, more explanation, more demo, these kind of things. Over all that, all the day was about open source framework, and open source is working if you contribute, if you ask, if you give some feedback. It's true for Babylon, it's true for Cordova, so don't hesitate. Send an email, go on the forum, go on GitHub, ask for question really and feedback. I'm trying to do that, that's not working. Developer here, we are inside Microsoft, developer here really love this kind of feedback. I was very surprised about that when I arrived from France. I have some meeting with developers. I was timid, I was shy to ask the guy, oh, my code is not working, I don't understand well. And when the guy say, oh yes, I totally understand, I will change the code for you. It's pretty amazing. That's the way the open source is working. So don't hesitate to share your feedback. That finish your day.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoy it, and see you soon.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.